Chapter 1522. Under the gazes of the crowd, Zhu Rong slowly moved towards Zhang Yan. When he was not far away from Zhang Yan, he stood still. His mountain-like body blocked out the sunlight, and half of the sky suddenly darkened. He looked at Zhang Yan and said in a booming voice, "I'm here on behalf of a fellow Taoist. As long as you swear not to go to Xianhong Heaven within 1,000 years, I can promise you that I won't make things difficult for you." Priest Gong's letter to him was to find a way to make Zhang Yan stay in outer space. He did not mention anything else. There were two ways to do it. One was to kill the target and settle things once and for all. The other was to threaten and coerce. Although he was not weak in fights of magical powers and had killed many cultivators of the same generation, it did not come without a price. This time, he was only here to return a favor. Even if he won, he would not get any benefits. If he could, he would rather use the latter method to settle this matter. This was also the reason why he came here with great fanfare. He wanted Zhang Yan to clearly see the power he possessed and make the latter retreat. When the crowd heard his words, they all revealed thoughtful expressions. If Zhu Rong had only asked Zhang Yan not to go to Xianhong Heaven, perhaps they would not have thought much of it. At most, they would think that Zhang Yan had offended a spiritual master in Xianhong Heaven. However, when he mentioned the 1,000 years limit, they could not help but think of the divine item left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Connecting the cause and effect of these two matters, many people guessed the whole story on the spot. This spiritual master Zhang in front of them was very likely the owner of the divine item in Xianhong Heaven. However, Mount Luo Monastery was unwilling to take it out. Now that they had invited Zhu Rong, it was obvious that they wanted to force him to give it up. Taoist Tong Hai also thought of this, but he could not tell whether it was true or not. Just now, Zhang Yan had said that he only needed to watch from the side, so he endured it and did not speak. At this moment, Zhang Yan was also sizing Zhu Rong up. This person must have found the root fruit to be able to walk in the heavens without being bound by a realm. Moreover, this person was different from Guizhu. He had inherited the cultivation method of his ancestors, so his divine ability must be extremely powerful. However, he had not reached that step. He replied indifferently, "What I do is not something you can control." Zhu Rong didn't give up on persuading him. He said in a deep voice, "I know why you're here, but with the 10 exalted true masters of the Black Flood Heaven and the Black Flood Heaven Lord holding the fort, you don't stand a chance, so why are you so persistent? Take a step back, it will be good for both you and others." The spiritual masters were a little surprised. This Zhu Rong was easy to talk to today. In the past, he never gave his opponents a chance. However, after thinking about it again, this spiritual master Zhang's qi was deep and his strength was really unpredictable. He would not be easy to deal with. Moreover, if he was really the owner of the divine item determined by the great underworld patriarch, then his background was not small. Zhang Yan said calmly, "Whether we stay or leave, whether we choose to give up or not, it's all an internal matter of our sect. Outsiders are not allowed to interfere." He looked up. "Since you've come to find me, why do you need to say so much?" Zhu Rong stared at him for a moment and said, "Fine." Since he could not persuade him, then he would subdue him with force. He looked around and said, "This is the venue of the 100 sect rehearsals. It is not suitable to fight here. Why don't we change to another place?" He also knew that he had made a lot of noise by coming here and probably caused a lot of dissatisfaction. Normal people could not care less, but the Heavenly Lord of Xianyang Heaven could not. Even though he usually did not care about things, it was hard to say if he would not intervene when the venue of the 100 sect rehearsals was disrupted. Zhang Yan had no objections. With a thought, he turned into a clear light and flew into the sky. Zhu Rong also let out a roar and rose into the sky. Both of them were extremely fast. Soon, they arrived outside the land. It was a vast void around them. It was empty and the stars in the sky were only specks of light. The spiritual masters also followed. It was extremely rare to see a battle of this level. Moreover, This was not a spar but a real battle of life and death. How could they miss it? Only Daoren, who had spoken to Zhu Rong before, did not move. He stroked his beard and pondered for a moment. He looked down at Tianyu and thought, a battle between two spiritual masters is a rare opportunity. I will fulfill your wish. He took out a jade plate and placed his hands between his thumb and forefinger. The plate flew up by itself. One side reflected the void and the other side shone on the floating platform of Tianyu. Instantly, the figures of Zhang Yan and Zhu Rong appeared. Not only that, but as the rays of light continued to jump out, the same scene appeared in every place where the battles were taking place. Even the mortal sheds in Xianyang sky who hadn't come to watch the battle were alarmed. They all came out of their meditations and paid attention to the battle. Daoist Tong Hai was already above Tianyu. He used his spirit to communicate, Daoist friend Zhang, I heard that Zhu Rong has a treasure for escaping. It is this treasure that allows him to come and go as he pleases without fear of being pursued. In the past, no one who was targeted by him could escape. Once you fight with him, it is impossible to retreat. The only way to have a chance of winning is to defeat him with all your might. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, Thank you for telling me. He looked around and saw that he was far enough away from the land. Hence, he stopped. Zhu Rong saw that he stopped and also stopped. He then took a few steps back and took a deep breath. He was already a giant. With the activation of this breath of spiritual vigor, he grew even bigger. In the past, he had fought countless battles and accumulated a wealth of experience. Once he entered the state of fighting, he could cut off all distracting thoughts and worries. The only goal left was to defeat and kill his opponent. The battle between cultivators of the same generation was usually a battle between the primordial spirit and the root fruit. However, he was born with a strong body. Coupled with his acquired cultivation, his body was almost indestructible. This meant that even if he did not use the root fruit, he could still block many attacks. When his opponent encountered his attacks, he had to sacrifice the root fruit to avoid them. In comparison, he had a huge advantage. However, this didn't mean that he didn't have any weaknesses. He relied on many treasures to make up for these weaknesses one by one. Furthermore, he still had the flesh sustenance technique. Even if he was destroyed on the spot, he could still come back to life. At this moment, Zhu Rong felt that his previous worries were laughable. Here, unless the Xianyang Heaven Lord personally came, who else could really threaten him? As his aura grew stronger, a golden light bloomed from his body. The brilliance was so bright that it almost covered the sun in the distance. The golden hammer in his hand was also slowly raised. Fan Shu and Shang Zhen knew that he was about to attack. One by one, they took out their magical treasures to prevent themselves from being affected by the aftershock. On the many islands below, all the cultivators watching this scene held their breaths. It was as if their minds were seized. Their bodies felt like they had sunk into the deep sea and were enveloped by boundless pressure. This was only the accumulation of power. He had not actually attacked yet. If this hammer were to strike, it was hard to imagine what kind of damage it would cause. Everyone tensed up. In front of the jade tablet, everyone felt as if they were in the same situation. They did not know how Zhang Shangzhen would block this attack. Zhu Rong's golden hammer was gradually raised high. Even though the aura on his body continued to rise, his expression still maintained its previous calm and indifference. This golden hammer was a supreme treasure left to him by the giant spirit clan. It had a special characteristic. As long as it was raised and successfully swung, it would definitely hit the opponent. No defensive magical treasure in the world could block it. Even if one tried to escape, it would be useless. The only way to deal with it was to interfere midway. In the past, none of the cultivators who fought with him would let him act calmly. They would all try to stop him. However, once they did so, they would fall into his rhythm and arrangements. However, Zhang Yan stood there without moving. Therefore, he judged that the other party should have seen through this and was unwilling to fall into the trap. In that case, the only way to block this attack was to use the root fruit to avoid it. This was a good thing. With just one attack, he could force the other party to use the root fruit. It could be said that he had gained the upper hand from the beginning. This thought flashed through his mind. At this moment, the golden hammer was already raised high. Whether it was his aura or strength, both had risen to the peak. With a roar, he smashed the hammer down in front of him. Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly became deep. He did not dodge, nor did he use the root fruit. Instead, he met this person's attack with a punch. The moment he attacked, there was a loud bang. He saw countless Zhurongs swinging their hammers at him. This was not an illusion, but a change in the future that he saw. After reaching the great perfection of the strength path 6 revolutions, he was already entrenched above the past and the future. Although he was limited by his strength path body and was unable to be like Kong Ying back then, he was unable to fear the attacks of anyone with a lower cultivation base than him. However, he was able to predict all the changes his opponent would make. Every Zhurong here was real. They were all shadows of the future that could display their full strength. As long as he killed them, he would kill the Zhurong themselves. When he punched out, a Zhurong's body exploded before he could swing his hammer. In the next moment, it was as if nothing had happened. Everything returned to the beginning. Before he was hit by Zhang Yan's punch, a treasure in front of his chest flew out and released a ray of light to block the attack. The giant hammer successfully smashed onto Zhang Yan's body, but not long after, it was once again shattered by a ray of light. Everything returned to the moment when he swung his golden hammer. This time, he did not take out a treasure to protect himself. Instead, he stopped his hammer and used another technique. But not long after, it was once again shattered by thousands of lightning bolts, and everything returned to the beginning. Zhurong continued to use all sorts of methods here, but they were all crushed mercilessly by Zhang Yan one after another. His numbers became fewer and fewer, and the point of recovery was also constantly receding. This was because every time he was killed, a future would be snatched away, and a possibility would be severed. As the Zhu melts disappeared one by one, only one was left. In the real world, Zhang Yan's punch had just now Zhang Yan's real punch had been delivered. Chapter 293, The Antecedents of the Unfinished Relationship. Chapter 1523. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan's punch had reached its end. Then, everyone heard an earth-shattering sound. The sound did not come from the outside, but from everyone's hearts. Looking at the battlefield again, it was as if nothing had happened. Zhurong still maintained his original expression. He raised his golden hammer high, and a murderous aura filled the sky. However, the expressions of the onlookers were strange. They felt as if something was different, but they couldn't pinpoint what it was. A moment later, a scene that shocked everyone appeared. Cracks appeared on the surface of Zhurong's body. First, it started from his face, and then it gradually spread outwards. Very quickly, it covered his entire body. In the end, his entire body shattered like glass, and it turned into specks of light before disappearing. Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent as he slowly withdrew his hand. With that strike just now, he had already killed all of Zhurong's possibilities and severed all of Zhurong's futures. So, the moment he swung his fist, Zhurong was destined to die. However, Zhurong's cultivation was still there. He had also expended a lot of divine will in order to defeat his opponent with one blow. If there had been a mistake in the process, or if one of Zhurong's future shadows had escaped, it would mean that he still had a chance of survival and could not be completely killed. Not to mention that all of his previous efforts would have been wasted, but he would have wasted a lot of vitality. However, in the eyes of outsiders, all of this happened in an instant. They only watched as Zhang Yan punched, and Zhurong collapsed and died. The scene was extremely shocking. No one had thought that the battle would end so quickly. It should be known that in a battle between two mortal metamorphosis cultivators, even if one side had a great advantage, the outcome could not be determined in a short period of time. It would almost take a dozen or even dozens of years until one side exhausted all of their vitality and died. However, Zhu Rong was killed by a punch in front of them. It simply overturned everyone's understanding of the past. At this moment, at the place where Zhu Rong disappeared, a hole suddenly appeared. It pulled everything in its surroundings in, and just now, it had disappeared. Someone exclaimed, a mysterious void hole, this. Could it be that Zhu Rong is really dead? Someone who did not believe it retorted, how is that possible? Didn't Zhu Rong still have the flesh possession technique? Even if his physical body was destroyed here, he would be able to come back to life somewhere else. Moreover, Zhu Rong still had the root fruit to avoid the calamity. Just now, they had only exchanged one move. No matter how powerful this Zhang Shengzhen was, how could he know where Zhu Rong was? How can you kill Zhu Rong just like that? The previous person had nothing to say. Under normal circumstances, when a person like Zhu Rong encountered a life and death crisis, the root fruit would automatically appear, allowing him to avoid the calamity. However, the root fruit had not appeared from the beginning to the end, so it was clear that he should not have died. However, the reality was that this person's soul had been destroyed, so it did not make sense. At this moment, there were many people who were confused like him. However, they did not know that although Zhu Rong did not use the root fruit when he appeared, it did not mean that the shadows of the future did not use it. Moreover, they did not use it once, but countless times, which allowed Zhang Yan to take the opportunity to find where Zhu Rong was. However, the truly terrifying thing was that Zhu Rong did not know all of this. This was the power of the divine contract. Even if your future was completely taken away, your current body would not know. In the end, you could only obediently accept death, unless you cut off your past and future body, or if you were above it. Obviously, Zhu Rong had not reached this realm. Everyone in the field was discussing spiritually. However, those who had not reached this realm, and had not personally experienced it, could only make guesses, and it was difficult for them to truly understand the mystery. Perhaps those with great mediums who had cut off their past and future bodies would be able to sense the various changes here, but at this moment, other than the Xianyang Heaven Lord, who was nowhere to be found, there was no one with such cultivation. At this moment, in an extremely quiet cave, a beautiful female Taoist was sitting cross-legged. In front of her, there was a jade altar about 3 feet tall, and on top of it was a piece of flesh. It was originally moving slowly like a living thing, but suddenly, the vitality on it seemed to be sucked out in an instant, and it turned into a grayish-white stone. After a few breaths, it turned into a pile of debris. The female Taoist opened her eyes and looked at the piece of flesh. Her face was filled with shock and uncertainty. She performed a spell and instantly revealed a sorrowful and angry expression. She said, "My son has the self as heart thread that I gave him. If he is in danger, there will be an omen. How could he be killed?" She gritted her teeth and turned into a gust of wind to leave, but halfway there, a layer of jade-green barrier appeared out of nowhere in front of her, and she was forcefully blocked. This female Taoist seemed to not give up, and she kept charging. The location of her cave was originally buried deep in the ground, and there were several mountains above it. However, her actions caused the mountains to shake, and the rumbling sound traveled for 1,000 miles. A clear light flashed, and a middle-aged cultivator in green with a slightly weathered face landed in front of the mountain. He said in a dialect to the people below, "Junior sister, what are you doing? Are you trying to make master angry again?" The female Taoist saw his arrival, and she stopped what she was doing. She said sorrowfully, "Senior brother, just now that my son is dead, I just want to go out and ask for an explanation." The middle-aged cultivator looked at her, and after some calculations, he knew the reason. He sighed and said, "You don't want to ask for an explanation, but you want to go out and get revenge." The female Taoist's face revealed a ferocious expression, and she said, "Yes, I want to go out and get revenge. I also want to ask Zhu Yu how he took care of my high heir." The middle-aged cultivator sighed and said, "Back then, Master said that Zhu Rong acted recklessly, and one day, he would meet with misfortune. Junior sister didn't think much of it at that time, but unexpectedly, Master was right." The female Taoist said with resentment, I don't dare to blame master, but if he didn't imprison me there, I would definitely discipline my son well, and I wouldn't let him go out and cause trouble. The middle-aged cultivator shook his head. He knew his junior sister's temperament too well. If he let her go out, things would only get worse. The female Taoist begged, "Senior brother, can you help me find out who harmed my son?" The middle-aged cultivator resolutely refused. "I won't do that, that will only harm you. Junior sister, as long as you give up this demonic technique, master will definitely let you out. By then, if there's anything, you can do it yourself." The female Taoist snorted, took a few steps back, and looked over coldly. "Senior brother, don't try to persuade me, I definitely won't give up this technique." The middle-aged cultivator said in a deep voice, "Junior sister, master wants you to be calm, you better cultivate here." With that, he turned and was about to leave. The female Taoist suddenly called out to him, "Senior brother, wait." She took another step forward and took out a jade pendant. "Junior sister can't get out, please give this to Ju Yu." The middle-aged cultivator frowned and said, "Junior sister, why do you have to do this?" The female Taoist said coldly, "Senior brother, are you going to help or not?" The middle-aged cultivator was silent for a moment, and in the end, he said, "This is the last thing I can do for you." The female Taoist bowed and said coldly, "Thank you, senior brother, I won't dare to trouble senior brother in the future." The middle-aged cultivator sighed, and with a wave of his hand, he took the jade pendant, and it turned into clear air, drifting away without a trace. Soon, a month passed. At this time, once the news of Zhu Rong's death spread in the Yuhuan heavens, it immediately caused a huge uproar. Who was Zhu Rong? Almost everyone in the Yuhuan heavens knew about him. His battle prowess wasn't supreme, but with the backing behind him, he had always been unscrupulous, and few dared to provoke him. Unexpectedly, he was killed this time, and it was said that he died on the spot with a single punch, and his soul was destroyed. When people first heard about this, they thought it was a heavenly lord who did it, but later they learned that this person came from outside the Yuhuan heavens, and was suspected to be a direct disciple of the great underworld patriarch. Only such a person wouldn't be afraid of the person behind Zhu Rong. After this battle, many sects had already started to secretly pay attention to Zhang Yan, and they had placed him within the range that they could not afford to provoke. However, at the same time, there were also many people who had strange thoughts and sent him invitations. In the Luo Mountain Monastery in Xianhong Heaven, Taoist Gong was also shocked when he heard the news. He was very clear about Zhu Rong's divine abilities, and even he wasn't a match for him in a head-on fight, but Zhang Yan could kill him in one move, which meant that it wouldn't be difficult to take him down. But he thought that as long as he didn't leave Xianhong Heaven, he would be fine. But he was a little angry that Zhu Rong had leaked the information, but it had already happened, and there was no point in being upset. He could only think of a way to save Zhu Rong. Fortunately, it wasn't that he didn't consider the possibility of failure. After all, Zhang Yan came under the guidance of the great underworld patriarch, how could he not have a trump card or two? He sneered, "There are many people behind Zhu Rong, especially Zhu Zhutian Heaven Lord Zhu Yu. He's not a person who's easy to talk to. His son was killed, he can't just sit and watch. Even if Taoist Zhang can escape from him, he won't have time to come to Xianhong Heaven." At this time, Zhang Yan and Taoist Tong Hai had already returned to Tambua's small world. After he killed Zhu Rong, Taoist Qi Chang no longer talked about the bet, and directly handed over his disciple. Taoist Tong Hai was overjoyed, but at the same time, he blamed himself. If he hadn't come to observe, perhaps Zhang Yan would have been able to avoid Zhu Rong. With a worried expression, he said, "The person behind Zhu Rong might come looking for trouble with fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist, be careful when you come down." Zhang Yan lightly nodded his head. This was only natural. Before he acted, he had already made preparations in his heart. Although Zhu Rong had the support of a supreme existence, he had offended even more people. This time around, if he killed this person, Zhang Yan's reputation would definitely spread out and he would be able to achieve his goal even faster. In any case, the pros of this matter outweighed the cons. With his current realm, if there was danger, he would be able to sense it. If there was danger, he could avoid it in advance. Moreover, the place he was going to was Qinghua Heaven. As long as he obtained a demon subjugation edict there, he wouldn't have to worry about external enemies for the time being. The Green Jade Palace had decreed that if a force or cultivator had a demon subjugation edict, no one could do anything to them within the time limit set in the edict. In the past, many cultivators who offended their enemies did the same, and Zhu Rong was no exception. And Zhang Yan was originally prepared to make a name for himself. With this layer of protection, he could avoid a lot of trouble. Chapter 1524. After Zhang Yan returned to Tanbua sect, he did not pay attention to the disturbances outside and continued to deduce the unfinished cultivation method. He was already close to the final juncture, and this time, he focused all his attention on it. It only took him 2 months to complete it. Not only that, but even his own Taishian true technique had greater gains, and his understanding of its changes had deepened. At this step, the feeling from last time had appeared again, but this time it was different. It seemed that as long as he thought about it, he could see a magical technique. He thought about it. Although the Taishian true technique was deduced by himself, it was still an evolution from the Taishian sect. There was an inseparable connection between the two, and the feeling he had was likely a legacy left behind by the mighty figures of the Taishian sect for their descendants. Perhaps all the descendants of the Taishian sect who had cultivated to this level could come into contact with it. If he chose to accept it at this moment, he might be involved, but it could also bring trouble. The best result here was nothing more than obtaining a cultivation method, but the other side was likely to notice his existence, which would bring unpredictable risks. But now, with the Patriarch's divine item in front of him, he did not need to do this at all. He only needed to improve his strength step by step. Therefore, in his cultivation, he deliberately avoided that place and decided to wait until the appropriate time in the future to come into contact with it. He raised his hand, and a beam of spiritual light shot out, recording the cultivation method in a jade scroll. He then waved his sleeve and came out of seclusion. He stepped into the matrix door and came to where Jinren Tongguang was cultivating. At the door, someone reported to him, and not long after, the guard came back and said, "The sect leader invites Zhang Shangzhen inside." Zhang Yan nodded and stepped on a jade wave. In an instant, his body merged with the water, and after a few turns, he reappeared above a river. He looked up and saw Taoist Tongguang waiting there. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Taoist Tongguang." Taoist Tongguang returned the greeting and invited him into the inner room. After they sat down, he said with a smile, "A few days ago, I saw the spirit pool slowly surging, and clear light sprinkling down. This is a great auspicious sign, and I am afraid it will fall on you." Zhang Yan smiled and took out the jade scroll. He handed it over with both hands and said, "I did not disappoint you." Taoist Tongguang's expression became serious. He stood up from his seat and took it with both hands. He returned to his seat, and his consciousness turned inside. He read the cultivation method once, and his eyes could not help but reveal a look of joy. He nodded and said, "Wonderful, wonderful." The cultivation method that Zhang Yan evolved paid special attention to the foundation, but it did not have a high requirement for aptitude at the beginning. The threshold was much lower than other cultivation methods. However, this did not mean that this cultivation method was not brilliant. Instead, it went from shallow to deep. As long as one had enough patience and perseverance to cultivate, they would not achieve great results, but at least their cultivation would not be too low. The most important point was that this cultivation method was of the same origin as the cultivation methods of Tanbua sect. When the disciples cultivated halfway, even if they switched to other cultivation methods, there would not be any hindrance, and the choices they had would be much greater. Taoist Tongguang praised, "Just this one cultivation method can make a sect flourish." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "Sect leader Tongguang is too kind." He was able to do this because the cultivation methods of the Tanbua sect were rare to begin with. There were only a few left and right, and they were all of similar attributes. If it were the 5 skills of the Qi-Tsang sect, it would be extremely difficult to achieve this. Taoist Tongguang was in a good mood and said, Taoist Zhang, there is no need to be modest. With this cultivation method, the future path of my Tanbua sect's disciples will be greatly broadened. My sect is indebted to you. Zhang Yan smiled and said, since this matter is done, I will also take my leave. Taoist Tongguang urged, the waves outside have not calmed down, why don't Taoist Zhang stay a few more days? Zhang Yan said, there is no need. Now that the outside world knows that I am in Tanbua sect, I am afraid that staying will bring trouble to your side. Taoist Tongguang smiled and said, my Tanbua sect also has the protection of the talisman left by the founder, so we are not afraid of external enemies. However, I see that Taoist Zhang has other plans. Since you have decided to leave, then I will not stay any longer. He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade talisman. He handed it over, if Taoist Zhang needs anything in the future, just bring this item to me. My Tanbua sect will definitely help. Zhang Yan accepted it gladly, thanked him, and got up to leave. After coming out of the cave abode, he went back to make some preparations. On the second day, he set off for Qinghua Heaven. Taoist Tongguang came to send him off on the orders of Taoist Tongguang. He said, Taoist Zhang, how do you want to deal with the Luoshan Monastery's betrayal? Zhang Yan said concisely, the time is not right. Taoist Tongguang immediately had a plan. He said, Zhu Rong spread the news of you being the owner of the divine object, which is very disadvantageous to Taoist Zhang. Perhaps someone is stirring up trouble behind the scenes. Zhang Yan understood that Zhu Rong hinted that he was the owner of the divine object in front of everyone. This was actually harboring evil intentions. It would definitely attract many people to covet him or use him to achieve some kind of goal. Taoist Tongguang's worry was not without reason. However, he didn't care. If this matter was known by outsiders, many people would have designs on him. But with the great underworld patriarch's guidance, it was actually beneficial for him to do things in the future. Right now, he didn't plan to retrieve the object. For the time being, no one would get it. But when he was strong enough, he wouldn't have to worry about these things anymore. Before that, Luoshan Monastery would look after the divine object for him, so he didn't have to worry about it being lost at all. After bidding farewell to Tongguang, he walked to the front of the skyscraping spirit boat. Renji was already waiting there. He bowed respectfully and said, disciple greets Shangzhen. Zhang Yan nodded and said, follow me onto the boat. Renji nodded and followed. Just now, when he stepped into the boat, he was surprised to find that it was a vast world. There were mountains in the distance, and there were beasts on the plains. If he didn't know that he was inside the boat, he would have thought that he was in a small world. Zhang Yan said, your cultivation level is still low. You have to focus on the cultivation technique I passed down to you. Renji replied seriously, disciple has been diligent in cultivation every day. I have never slacked off. He was a rogue cultivator, and he usually had to pay many times more than the disciples of the sects in order to obtain external objects and techniques. Now that he was able to follow by the side of an almighty being, how could he not cherish this kind of opportunity? Zhang Yan nodded and said, you have a strong will and indomitable spirit. This is why I chose you. Go. If there's anything, someone will call you. At this moment, a maid came up and said, Perfected One, please follow me. Renji bowed to Zhang Yan again and left with the maid. Zhang Yan returned to the inner chamber and drove the skyscraping boat toward the myriad empty realm ring. He purposely hid the boat and all his aura so that his whereabouts wouldn't be discovered by others and cause unnecessary trouble. After a while, the boat approached the myriad empty realm ring. Now that he was here, he couldn't go there silently anymore. However, he didn't need to hide anymore. But at this moment, he suddenly felt that no matter whether it was the people or the objects around him, everything had suddenly stopped moving. They maintained the same motion, and it was as if they were embedded in a painting. At the same time, an aura enveloped him. This wasn't the first time he had encountered this aura. It had appeared when he was fighting Zhu Rong that day. He looked up and saw a Taoist appearing in front of the boat. He thought for a moment and appeared from the boat. He put his sleeves behind his back and said, "Which Taoist is here?" The Taoist bowed and replied, "Zhang Shengzhen, I am a disciple of Xian Yang Heaven's Heavenly Lord. Now that Shengzhen wishes to leave my place, I have come under the Heavenly Lord's orders to give Shengzhen a gift." He raised his hand and a jade leaf flew over. Zhang Yan took it and saw that there was a strand of consciousness on it. When he swept it down, the jade leaf shattered. His eyes flashed and he looked up. He said, "Please help me thank Xian Yang Heaven Lord for his kindness." The Taoist bowed again and turned to leave. Soon, he disappeared. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and returned to the boat. He activated his mana and turned into a beam of clear light, flying into the realm ring. The moment he left, everything in the myriad empty realm ring returned to normal. Just now, no one noticed what happened. Holding Wang Tian, Tribulation Heart Cave. Heavenly Daughter Han Xiaorua wore a white gauze gown with no accessories. She stood on a pure jade crystal platform and spoke to a rainbow-colored beam of light. "Mother, since that person is the true master of the divine item, if we plan a trap, we might be able to obtain the divine item through this person." A slim figure appeared in the rainbow and said, "It's not a good time to get in touch with Taoist Zhang." Han Xiaorua was puzzled. "Mother, why? Everyone is getting restless and has their own plans. Even if Taoist Zhang is powerful, he's only one person. If I'm late, the god item might fall into someone else's hands." The figure in the rainbow said, "It's not that simple. Before Zhang Shengzhen gets the god item, we can't do anything." Han Xiaorua was reluctant and said, "Mother," the figure in the rainbow light waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "My son, you need to know that the divine item left behind by the great underworld ancestral master is rumored to be able to help one reach that realm. However, if someone can really reach that realm, the Green Jade Palace might not ignore it." Han Xiaoxiao's heart trembled, and she suddenly realized that the palace master of Green Jade Palace was at the peak of all heavens, and as the only true Yang Almighty, he might not wish for another person of the same generation to appear in the heavens. This was a very simple logic, but before she was reminded, she didn't even have the slightest thought of thinking about this. This was an extremely abnormal situation, as if someone had deliberately concealed her consciousness. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart, and she said with a trembling voice, "Mother," a voice came from the rainbow again. "You don't need to be afraid. In the eyes of that person, you and I are so insignificant. He won't deliberately target us, but you need to know when to stop. At this time, you can't be the one to take the lead. You just need to quietly wait for fate and the fate." Han Xiaorua realized that the situation was too deep. It wasn't time for her to get involved. Thus, she knelt and said, "I will obey Mother's orders." Chapter 1525. After Zhang Yan passed through the world ring, he instantly felt that he had barged into a vast qi dynamic. This qi dynamic was boundless, and the whole world was under it. The skyscraping boat seemed to have encountered a great pressure. Its speed suddenly slowed down and was only 10 to 20% of its original speed, and it was still decreasing. Not only that, even his body seemed to be wrapped in a layer of thick clothes, as if there was some kind of barrier between him and this world. He had expected this situation, so he landed the boat and anchored it on a barren high mountain. In the Yuhuan heavens, Qinghua heaven was different from where he was. It was known as the 100 Realms Mix, 10,000 ruins hide emptiness. The big and small worlds intersected and were not clearly divided. However, this did not mean that cultivators could come and go as they pleased. Instead, there were more restrictions than other places. In some aspects, it could even be said to be the world with the most rules among the heavens. For example, most cultivators who entered this world for the first time could not fly. According to the rules set by the Green Jade Palace, if they did not want to be restricted, they could only slowly accumulate karma points. There were many ways to earn karma points, such as slaying demons and devils, helping people in danger, and even imparting Taoism. There were also many details to pay attention to. Usually, a practitioner needed to accumulate tens of thousands of karma points to be able to fly freely. However, this did not mean that they could do whatever they wanted. If a cultivator did evil, their previous karma points would be taken away, and they would still be beaten down to the mortal world unless they left this world. However, it was easy to enter, but difficult to leave. This was because once a cultivator entered this world, his divine sense and Taoist arts would be restricted by the Wali. If he wanted to use them, he would need to accumulate karma points and release the restrictions layer by layer until he had enough karma points. It was said that this was a divine sense performed by the palace master of Green Jade Palace. Therefore, there were no loopholes to take advantage of. Through this semi-forced method, most cultivators could only walk on the ground obediently and even mix in the mortal world. However, it was not without benefits. If you had enough karma points, you could even directly use the divine sense that Green Jade Palace gave you, or even exchange it for good magic treasures and elixirs. This also created a unique scene in this world. The more karma points a cultivator had, the more tricks he could use. If two cultivators had similar cultivation, they might not be able to win in other places, but here, the one with more karma points would definitely win. Rumor had it that the Green Jade Palace was doing this to deal with the demons from the outer realms. Most of the foreign enemies who had invaded the remnant heavens had entered the Green Jade Heaven. Due to this method, the demons that had just entered the Green Jade Heaven could not display much of their abilities. Even ordinary people who had a rough understanding of the Qi refinement Tao could fight against them as long as they had Dharma treasures and talismans passed down by cultivators. After understanding it, Zhang Yan thought that Green Jade Palace's intention was not so simple. There must be a deeper purpose. He believed that he was not the only one who had noticed this. Many people had also noticed it. However, the gap between them and the mighty figures of True Yang was too big, so there was no need for them to delve deeper into the secret, because it was meaningless. Even if they knew everything, they would not be able to change anything. He stretched out his hand and slightly clenched his fist. For a cultivator of his level, because he had already found the root and fruit and formed his own heaven, it was impossible for his magic power to be completely restrained. However, if he were to forcefully use it, the consumption would be several times or even more than 10 times than before. If he were to fight someone with a similar level of cultivation at this time, he would definitely be at a great disadvantage. However, there was one difference between him and others. Although his Qi refinement was like this, his body of strength could be replenished by an endless stream of inexplicable items that came from across space. At most, he could not increase his strength by himself during a battle, so it did not affect his fighting ability in this aspect. However, now that he was here, he did not want to show off too much, so he took out a shining talisman from his sleeve. Generally speaking, cultivators with mortal transformation cultivation were all mighty figures of a region. They did not need to walk step by step like other low-level cultivators. They only needed to send a talisman over, and Green Jade Palace would remove the restraints for them and allow them to use the many formation doors in the heavenly world to travel. However, the prerequisite for this was that they must be from the Yuhuan heavens. If they were not, they would need at least a mighty cultivator to introduce them. When he left Tanbua sect, Daoist Tong Guang had given him a referral talisman. At this moment, it came in handy. He used his dharma to lift it and let it fly into the sky. Then, he sat down and waited for news. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. However, Zhang Yan felt that something was wrong. He had asked Daoist Tong Guang before. After the referral talisman was sent, there would be a result in 5 or 6 days at most. Even if they were not willing to remove the restraints on him, there would definitely be a reply to explain the reason. However, there was no movement at all. Perhaps there was some unforeseen event here. It was more likely that someone had tampered with the talisman, so the talisman did not successfully reach Green Jade Palace. He thought about it. If it was the latter possibility, then the other party might have a backup plan. He could not just sit here and wait. Since this method did not work, then he could only do it step by step. The Demon Demand Edict could only be obtained at the Golden Hall of Imperial Edict. To get there, one had to pass through the formation door that Green Jade Palace had set up beforehand. However, the cultivators who returned first had to sacrifice a sufficient number of demons and accumulate a certain amount of karma points before they could use this place. However, with his status, there was no need for him to do it himself. He only needed to instruct his subordinates. With a flick of his finger, a ray of spiritual light shot out. Not long after, Renji came to the front of the seat and bowed. He said, "What instructions do you have for me, master?" Zhang Yan said, "This time, you and Chu Xiao will go out together. There is no need for you to do anything else. Just focus on killing demons and saving lives. When the time is right, I will call you back." Renji did not question further. He immediately replied, "Yes, master." In reality, with Chu Xiao's ability, it was very easy for him to do these things. However, he was still a demon. If there was no one to control him, many people would immediately come to take him in for the sake of karma points. In the Great Bitter Plains, a long caravan was walking on the wasteland against the strong wind. Most of the caravans were demons such as rhinoceroses and oxen. At the front of the caravan was a tall old man. Although his hair and beard were silver, his eyes were sharp and his steps were steady. It was obvious that he still had an extraordinary physique. After a long time, seeing that the wind was getting weaker, he spat out the sand and stones in his mouth. He pulled a horse over and untied his water skin. He removed the stopper from his mouth and drank a mouthful of water. He then asked a Taoist beside him, "Imperial advisor, where are we now?" The Taoist said, "Let me see." He took out a piece of talisman paper and waved it in the air. Then, he took out a porcelain bowl filled with clear water and soaked the talisman in it. After a while, a few golden words appeared on the surface of the bowl. He lifted his head and said happily, "Leader Zhao, we are almost there. After we cross this col, we will reach the Qi altar in at most half a month's journey." The old man who was addressed as team leader Zhao also showed joy in his eyes. He raised his voice and shouted to the tired people behind him, "Get your spirits up and work harder. Once we get past this mountain, we'll reach Formation City." Because the group was too long, it required people to pass the words down one by one. However, when everyone heard those words, their spirits were greatly uplifted, and they roared in unison. The originally dispirited and listless group suddenly glowed with vigor. The Taoist reached into his pouch and took out a bottle of fine wine as well as several plump and moist red fruits. Then, he began to eat them. The few people following behind him were all envious and jealous. A man who looked like a manager came to Leader Zhao's side and stared at the pouch. He whispered, "Leader, if we had such an item, why would we need to transport it in a big cart? Can we ask for it?" Leader Zhao was knowledgeable. He shook his head and said, "Don't think too much. This kind of celestial treasure can only be activated with mana. Even if you give it to us, no one will be able to move it. Moreover, the pouch can only hold half of the caravan. It is not as useful as you think." When the manager heard this, he could not help but say that it was a pity. The Taoist drank a few mouthfuls of wine and felt comfortable all over. His tiredness was also swept away. He also heard the conversation between the two and put away the wine bottle again. He said with a smile, "Leader Zhao is right and wrong. For example, the thing in my hand can only hold half of the caravan. However, the Qiankuan pouch in the hands of the superior cultivators can easily hold the whole caravan." The manager's eyes lit up and he said, "I wonder how many karma points such an item would cost." In the Qinghua heaven, mortals could also have karma points. However, they mostly used them to exchange for things that were useful to them, such as weapons, talismans, and magic weapons. Pills and external medicine were the most common things that could be exchanged. The Taoist calculated and said casually, 1,000,000 karma points. The manager was shocked and then said dejectedly, 1,000,000 karma points. I'm afraid only the relatives of the nobles in the imperial court can gather that much. The Taoist was about to say something when his expression suddenly changed. His nose twitched and he said, "What a strong demonic qi. There are demons here. Quickly stop and guard." Just as he was speaking, black smoke suddenly rose from the ground around him, covering the sky. Then, the sand was lifted, and one after another, ape-like monsters with rat faces crawled out. However, most of them were skin and bones, and their eye sockets were sunken. It was obvious that they hadn't eaten for a long time. Leader Zhao reacted very quickly and shouted, "Form the caravan formation and quickly take out the protective jade stone." This situation came without warning, but few people panicked. It seemed that they had long been accustomed to this situation. As soon as the order was given, everyone took out flat stones that were the size of golden melons and hit them with mallets. Suddenly, a ray of light bloomed and covered the caravan. Under the dark sky, the whole caravan was like a long dragon with a shining back. The Taoist looked around and frowned. "These are earth monkeys. There are quite a lot of them. That's strange. How could there be so many monsters lying in ambush so close to the altar?" Suddenly, he saw a Taoist leading a double-headed bull on the opposite hill. His eyes lit up and he said loudly, "I wonder which fellow Taoist is here. I'm Wei Song from Riding Cloud Ridge. I'm escorting the medicine team here. I hope you can help me." Chapter 1526. In the Qinghua Heaven, at the edge of the Qiong ruins, a giant man who was 100 feet tall was sitting on a broken cauldron. He seemed to be resting with his eyes closed. There was a short horn on his forehead, but there was no demonic qi on his body. It was obvious that he was half demon and half human. In front of him, there were many demon skulls piled up high. There was a large golden axe on top of them, which made him look extremely ferocious and bloody. Suddenly, he felt a surge of qi in the pouch on his waist. His expression changed and he took out a jade bead. He threw it out and a spiritual light rose from the ground. After a short while, he saw a cold-faced Taoist appear in the room. He looked at him and said, "It's Taoist Li. Why are you looking for me?" Taoist Li bowed to him and said, "Taoist Jiang, the Taoist Zhang who killed your senior brother came to my Qinghua Heaven a few days ago. I stopped his referral talisman. He is now in a certain place and can't move forward or retreat." The giant man suddenly looked up, stared at him and asked, "Really?" Then he asked, "Where is this person now?" A few months ago, when he received the news of Zhu Rong's death, he didn't rush back to avenge him. Instead, he paid a great price to ask someone familiar in the heavens to pay attention to the whereabouts of this person. He didn't expect to receive news so soon. Taoist Li smiled and didn't answer. The giant man thought for a while and asked in a deep voice, "What do you want?" Taoist Li said calmly, "I heard that Jiang Shangzhen has a Jia Han lamp from the Thunder Ruins. If you can give it to me, I will tell you the whereabouts of Taoist Zhang. How about it?" The giant man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought. After a long time, he said, "Where can I give it to you?" Seeing that he agreed, Taoist Li's eyes were filled with joy, and even his tone became faster. He said, "You can send this to the evil punishing mountain, and I will tell you where he is. However, you need to know that I can only delay it for you for a year at most. If it takes any longer, I won't be able to do anything. Otherwise, this matter will involve my family." The giant surnamed Jiang furrowed his brows and said, "I can't get away for the time being. Fellow Taoist Zhua and I have already done this, so why can't you delay it a little longer?" Taoist Li shook his head and said, "How can it be so simple? The crime of stealing the charm of recommendation is not small. Every month, I will be deducted 1,000,000 karma points. Moreover, after this matter, there will be people who will investigate and I will be punished separately. If I obstruct them for a year, I think I can still bear it. If it drags on, I am afraid I will be in danger of being demoted from the mortal world." The giant surnamed Jiang pondered for a moment, then said decisively, "All right, I'll definitely rush back within a year. However, fellow Taoist Li, please do your best to delay. If my karma points are deducted, I'll find a way to compensate you." Taoist Li said, "It looks like fellow Taoist Jiang found something good in the ruined lands again." The giant surnamed Jiang didn't deny it and said, "I did gain something." Taoist Li's eyes brightened. I hope you won't make things too difficult for me. After he finished speaking, his figure instantly disappeared, and the jade bead that contained the aura also turned into fragments. The giant surnamed Jiang stretched out his hand, grabbed the gold copper axe that was resting on the pile of demon skulls, and lifted it up. At this moment, a flame suddenly flew over from the sky, and after a few breaths, it landed not far away with a loud boom, creating a huge pit. A burly cultivator climbed out of the pit, cupped his fists and said excitedly, "Fellow Taoist Jiang, we've killed a total of 3,237 demons from the Luo Yao tribe this time. If we send them back, we'll be able to get at least 30 million karma points. If we can slaughter 2 more tribes, we'll be able to gather 10 million karma points." The giant surnamed Jiang looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist Jin, I need to return to the heavenly hall for a while. I'm afraid I won't be able to travel with you." The cultivator surnamed Jin was startled, and asked anxiously, "Why? Among us, fellow Taoists, cultivation is the highest, and you have the most karma points. Without fellow Taoist, the rest of us won't be able to destroy those 2 demon tribes." The giant surnamed Jiang said in a deep voice, "This time, I've let you down. If I can return, I'll definitely try to make up for your losses." The cultivator surnamed Jin noticed something was wrong with his tone, and looked at him, and asked tentatively, "Is it about Shangzhen Zhurong?" The giant surnamed Jiang was silent for a while, and then said, "That's right." The cultivator surnamed Jin let out a breath, and said, "Please forgive me for speaking bluntly, that Taoist Zhang is very powerful, and even Shangzhen Zhurong is no match for him. Although Shangzhen Zhang's magic power is not weak, how can he defeat this person?" The giant surnamed Jiang waved the gold copper axe in his hand, and said, "No, if it's somewhere else, I'm indeed no match for this person, but in the Qinghua heaven, I may not lose." "This person is actually in the Qinghua heaven?" The cultivator surnamed Jin's expression changed. "This is indeed a good opportunity." The giant surnamed Jiang nodded, and said, "So I have to go. If I miss this opportunity, I don't know when I'll get another one like this." The battle in the Qinghua heaven was different from other places. Not only did it depend on the strength of both sides, but also the accumulation of karma points. Zhang Yan was an extraterrestrial cultivator who had just entered the Qinghua heaven, so it was hard to say how much of his strength he could use. However, the giant surnamed Jiang had accumulated a large number of karma points over the past thousands of years, and even some sect leaders of large sects could not compare to him. At this moment, not only could he display his full strength, but he could also borrow the divine sense of the Green Jade Palace, so he had a much higher chance of winning here. The cultivator said seriously, "Fellow Jiang, if there's anything you need us to do, please let us know." However, the giant surnamed Jiang refused. "That Taoist Zhang also has a great background, so don't get involved in this matter. Besides, if I find this person, I won't go alone." He took a deep breath, and the big axe instantly turned into a golden light and flew into his nose aperture. He then said, "That person may leave at any time, so I can't delay for too long. I'll leave now. Everyone, be careful." After saying that, he leaped up and turned into a golden light that pierced through the sky. On the Great Suffering Plain, Ren Ji and Chu Xiao were ordered by Zhang Yan to go out and try to obtain karma points. Because they couldn't fly, they walked for a long time before they encountered a pack. Coincidentally, they saw that the pack was besieged by demons and heard someone calling for help, so they didn't hesitate anymore. They took out a stack of talisman from their sleeves and scattered it above them. Instantly, it turned into golden light that fell down. Because of the restriction of this world, he couldn't use any divine sense or Taoist arts, but it didn't mean that he couldn't use the celestial device talisman. Wherever the golden light passed, it only took a moment to sweep through the whole area, killing all the demons, leaving only piles of broken flesh and blood. The black smoke that was formed by the billowing demonic qi in the sky also gradually dispersed. Seeing this scene, Wei Song couldn't help but be shocked. He thought, this person's talisman is so powerful, but he didn't fly. It's very likely that he's a perfected person who just entered this place. He whispered a few words to Captain Zhao, then stood up and bowed. Wei Song greets Superior Cultivator. May I ask how I should address you, superior cultivator? Renji glanced at him and saw that he was only at the mystic light realm, but he didn't look down on him because of this. He also bowed and said, I am Renji. He then pointed at the two-headed bull demon beside him. This is Chu Zhao, who is traveling with me. Wei Song hurriedly bowed to Chu Zhao. Although the latter was only a bull demon, it was very normal for some cultivators to have demon servants following them. Chu Zhao looked at the corpses of the demons and blew out a puff of smoke from his nostrils. He said, You guys are really unlucky. These earth monkeys have been hiding here for at least 100 years. If no one came here, they would have starved to death in 100 or so days. It's because they smelled your scent that they couldn't help but come out just now. If we didn't happen to pass by, you guys would have been in trouble. A young man who was about 13 or 14 years old was slightly unconvinced. He took out a few talismans and waved them. He said, Superior cultivator, it's not like we can't fight back. Chu Zhao shook his head and said, Your talismans can only kill normal demons, but there's a demon king here. Those things are useless. What? Demon king? Wei Song and Captain Zhao's faces turned pale with shock, and a lingering fear surged in their hearts. A demon king required at least a nascent soul stage cultivator to deal with. If there really was one here, no one would be able to withstand it. The demons and evil in Qinghua heaven were greatly suppressed. Mortals could fight against them with the help of magic tools and talismans. This was also the reason why they were confident in crossing the wilderness. However, this was also limited. After all, mortals could only do so much. Even if demons could not use their magic and could not fly, they still had strong bodies. Even if the demon king was at the end of his life, it would not be difficult for him to kill all of them. After the two learned the truth, they hurriedly bowed again to thank him. Renji expressed that it was no big deal and asked, Where are you going? Captain Zhao said, We're all from Zhucheng. We're here to escort these precious materials and external medicine to the Eastern Secret Grand Temple of Zhishan country. We're already halfway there. Thanks to Master Wei's escort, we were able to arrive here smoothly. Because mortals in Qinghua heaven also had a certain degree of self-protection, they were responsible for picking precious materials and external medicine. However, they could not fly, so they could only use the most basic method, relying on people to carry beasts to transport them from one array gate to another. If cultivators were to escort them at this time, they would be able to accumulate a lot of karma points. Renji nodded and said, Do you know what kind of demons appear here? Wei Song hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, May I ask, superior cultivator, are you going out to travel and accumulate karma points? Renji said frankly, To be honest, this is the first time I've arrived here, so I'm going out to travel. Wei Song hurriedly said, Please forgive me for saying too much. If we're talking about the speed of accumulating karma points, nothing can compare to those ruined lands. Not only can you find treasures there, but you can also kill demons. Killing one demon will be worth at least tens of thousands of karma points. Due to my shallow cultivation, I can't go there, but with your abilities, you too can go there. Renji's expression brightened, and he asked telepathically, Is that so, fellow cultivator Chu? Chu Ban said, I've traveled with the old master for thousands of years, and the rules have long changed. However, those ruined lands are countless in size, and each is different. Some of them are dangerous places, and even powerful cultivators may not be able to enter and exit safely. As the saying goes, fortune comes from danger, and what this person said is true. Renji said, No matter how dangerous it is, can it withstand Zhang Shengzhen's supernatural power? We need to go back and inform Shengzhen of this as soon as possible. Chapter 1527. After listening to Wei Song's words, Renji realized that there might be more ways to earn karma points than he had imagined, and that it was not necessary to kill demons in the wilderness. However, the latter's cultivation was limited, and there were many things that could not be explained clearly. After some consideration, he decided to find a way to understand more, so he and Chu Ban escorted the caravan all the way to the Qi altar. The two of them stayed in the altar for a few days, and managed to gather a lot of information. After a discussion, they set off. Just now, not long after they left, a grand breeze blew past them and arrived in front of them. The two of them were immediately on guard. The breeze dispersed, and a smiling Taoist appeared. He bowed to them and said, "Please don't be alarmed. I have no ill intentions. I only came here to ask you a question. Is this your first time here?" Renji asked warily, "May I know who you are?" The Taoist replied, "I am Gong Shu, the altar master of the Qi altar. Before this, I was subduing demons. Just now, when I came back, I heard that you were here. I love to make friends, so I wanted to come and meet you." Renji did not believe his words. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Altar Master Gong. We haven't been here for long. What can I do for you?" The Taoist smiled and said, "I see that you two have an extraordinary background, and you want to know about karma points. I am afraid that you are in a difficult situation. I can point out a way for you." With a wave of his hand, a jade slip appeared out of thin air, and he handed it over. "Can the two of you take this item and let the esteemed one have a look at it?" With that said, he didn't wait for the two of them to reply. He cupped his hands once more, and then disappeared without a trace. Renji took the jade scroll. He thought for a moment and said, "Jinren Chu, what do you think?" Chu Ban said, "This Taoist's qi is unstable, so it should be a doppelganger. However, this person did come from Dharma City, so his background is not fake. There may be some other reason for him to come here. It is better to bring this item back and let the master decide." Renji agreed as well. He immediately retraced his steps and traveled day and night. 10 days later, he returned to the skyscraping Dermic boat. When he saw Zhang Yan, he reported everything that had happened and presented the jade slip to him. Zhang Yan took the jade slip and entered it with his consciousness. There were many ways to earn karma points, but one of them was mentioned. If a cultivator was in danger and did not have any karma points, he could make a vow to the heavens and owe karma points. Not only would he be able to remove the shackles, but he would also be able to regain his strength. He would also be given many benefits in advance. However, he would have to serve the Green Jade Palace for a period of 100 to 1,000 years. He smiled. Almighty cultivators sought transcendence and were usually unwilling to be restrained. However, if they were to encounter a life and death situation, they would not care so much. After all, their lives were more important. Thus, this technique was still somewhat useful. In fact, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was a life-saving treasure. If it was not for the fact that he could use his Dharma power easily, he might have seriously considered it. However, for the lower-level cultivators, this was a shortcut to join the Green Jade Palace. Looking at the situation, the Green Jade Palace did not recruit indiscriminately. If one's cultivation had not reached a certain level, one would not even be able to catch their eye. Apart from this, as Renji had reported, the easiest way to earn karma points was to go to the ruined lands. Green Jade Palace seemed to encourage cultivators to go there, so even those who had just arrived in Qinghua Heaven could use the formation door to go there. Zhang Yan read through everything recorded in the Jade Scroll one by one. His thoughts changed. Going to the ruined lands next was indeed a good choice. At the very least, he wouldn't have to stay in this place any longer. However, there were many ruined lands, and some of them were unusually dangerous. There was no detailed mention of them. After thinking for a while, he put down the Jade Scroll and asked, "Chu Peng, you have traveled with Immortal Yuan. Are you familiar with the ruined lands?" Chu Peng replied, "Master, the old master did not like fighting in Qinghua Heaven. He did not stay here for long, so my knowledge is limited. I only know that chaotic stars, floating ticks, and Xinghao are extremely vast and have countless demons. But after thousands of years, I do not know what they look like now. I only heard from the altar of Qi that these three places still exist and have not been conquered by cultivators." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He had heard about these three places when he was in Tanbua sect. For example, the branch of immortal Sun Yu's Milky Lake sect had almost all the upper echelons in the ruined lands of chaotic stars. It was still unknown whether they were alive or dead. After all, they were of the same branch. If possible, he could go there to accumulate karma points and also find out their whereabouts. Thinking of this, he shook his head. From this, he could see the short-sightedness of the Luo Mountain Monastery. They had always claimed to be the authentic one and had never cared about the side branches. They did not even care about those of the same branch that had fallen in the ruined lands. How could they be convinced by this? If they immediately sent people to rescue them after the incident, even if it was just for show, they would be able to win over some people's hearts. If they acknowledged that they were the authentic one, they could cook with a warm fire and constantly show their skills. But this person was not even willing to put on a show. He seemed to think that as long as he had the divine item, he did not need to care about anything else. It was no wonder that he was becoming estranged from those of the same branch. After weighing the pros and cons, he thought, then let's go to the ruined lands of chaotic stars first. When I have enough karma points, I will go to the Golden Hall of Imperial Edict to get the demon-demanding edict. After making up his mind, he ordered his subordinates to set up an altar outside according to the method described in the Jade Talisman. He used his transcendence energy to write a talisman and burned it in front of the altar. Not long after, a golden light shone down from the sky. When the light dissipated, he saw another edict hanging above the altar. Zhang Yan reached out and took it. With this item, he would be able to go to the ruined lands without any obstructions. After looking at it carefully, he put it into his sleeve and returned to the Dharma boat. He used his transcendence energy and flew towards the nearest formation door. His forced flight this time used up several times more transcendence energy than usual. However, the journey was not long, so this bit of consumption was nothing to him. In just half a day, he arrived at the peak of a high mountain. It could be seen that there was an altar with a circumference of more than 1,000 miles built here. A curtain of light hung down from the sky and passed through the thick layers of clouds. Its momentum was like a hanging waterfall, and it was as clear as the clear waves. He did not stop for long. Under the activation of his transcendence energy, the Dharma boat shook slightly. The brilliance in front of him shone and then disappeared. He knew that he had passed through the formation door. He looked up and saw that there was a vast land under his feet. However, there were broken rock pillars and collapsed palaces everywhere. The altar below the Dharma boat was still intact. There were billions of floating stones in the sky. At this moment, they seemed to be pushed by gusts of clear air and floated in a certain direction. From time to time, a few of them would leave the Qi River and fall from the sky, smashing heavily onto the ground with a trail of fiery light. He could sense that the ruined lands of chaotic stars seemed to be here but not here. It was as if it was dragged here by force and had not completely integrated into the Qinghua heaven. According to the records, demons from other realms would constantly be born here. No one knew where they came from. Perhaps this was the reason. Since he had reached the destination, he slowly withdrew his transcendence energy and landed the skyscraping Dharma boat. Then, he walked out. There were over 10 cultivators guarding the altar. When they saw the skyscraping Dharma boat coming over, they could tell that another powerful cultivator had arrived. They all came out from their cultivation grounds. One of them bowed and said, "I'm the altar master of this place, Ying Tao. May I ask why you're here, exalted sage?" Zhang Yan did not say anything. He gestured to Ren Ji, who was beside him, and said, "It's to earn karma points." Ying Tao thought for a while and said, "If that's the case, why don't you postpone your departure for a few days?" Zhang Yan said, "Why is that?" Ying Tao bowed again and said, "I received a message. In a few days, Fengming, Songshi, and other sects will come to kill demons. If you can take care of them, you'll be able to earn a lot of karma points." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. It was recorded in the Jade Scroll that taking care of lower-level cultivators was a relatively easy way to earn karma points. He said, "Then stay for a few more days." Ying Tao called out and a disciple came over with a golden book. After he took it, he handed it over respectfully and said, "This is karma points are limited. As long as you've accumulated a certain amount of karma points, you can be recorded in this book. At that time, you'll be rewarded by the Green Jade Palace. The higher your name is, the more rewards you'll receive." Zhang Yan's interest was immediately piqued. He took it and opened it to see that the first name on the list was Si Heng of the Observant Heaven. The second was Zheng Yinshao of the Accumulative Victory Heaven. The third was Zhan Qianchang of the Crossing Heaven. In the Qinghua Heaven, karma points were almost equivalent to strength. Karma points could even be used to avoid disasters and perform heavenly techniques. The people at the top were definitely not easy to get along with. He had to be careful. He looked down one by one. When he flipped to the 12th name, he found a familiar name, He Xianyin of the Heaven of Xianhong. He paused for a moment and continued flipping. Ying Tao said, "Those who can be ranked at the top are almost all mighty people. However, it's not difficult to be ranked at the top of the list for the venerables of Shangzhen." Zhang Yan smiled and put the golden book away. He asked, "How long has altar leader Ying been guarding this altar?" Ying Tao sighed. "I was sent here ever since I cultivated the cave. It's been more than 1,200 years. If there's no one to replace me, I'll have to wait another 300 years before I can be relieved of this responsibility." Zhang Yan asked, 1,000 years ago, there were cultivators from the Milky Way sect who came here. Altar leader Ying, do you know about it? Ying Tao thought for a moment and said, there was such a thing. At that time, sect leader Guo of the Milky Way sect, Shen Shangzhen, and 6 enlightened masters went to the depths of the ruined lands. There were 3 other sects who went with them. However, they seem to have fallen into the turbulent space vortex and there's no news of them since. Zhang Yan asked again, does altar leader Ying know where those sects fell? Ying Tao smiled bitterly. The turbulent space vortex is erratic. It appears and disappears from time to time. It's hard for me to know where it is. However, I do know that there's a golden enlightened master who has a map of evil views. There are many strange and dangerous places that have been explored by the predecessors. Perhaps it'll be useful to Shangzhen. Chapter 1528. After obtaining a lot of useful information from Ying Tao, Zhang Yan returned to the skyscraping Dharma boat and used a few days to refine a few talismans. Although he promised to protect those sects, with his current cultivation, it was impossible for him to do it himself. Bestowing a few talismans was enough to protect them. In reality, if it was another mortal metamorphosis cultivator doing this, they would at most send out a clone. It was just that he didn't have enough alchemy to move around. Clones also consumed a lot of transcendence energy, so he used a talisman that wasn't restricted to replace it. A few more days passed, and those sects all came. Hearing that they would receive the protection of a mighty person this time, they were all pleasantly surprised. The heads of each sect came to the Dharma boat to pay their respects. They received the talisman very solemnly and respectfully bowed and thanked him before leaving. After everyone left, Zhang Yan discovered to his surprise that the restriction on him had actually been loosened a little. He could already use some of his supernatural powers and transcendence energy. After thinking for a while, he guessed the reason behind it. Perhaps the karma points here didn't have to be completely completed to be obtained. As long as he had a good start, he would be able to obtain a portion of it. This was probably to make it easier for the cultivator to use the karma points better and thus stay longer in the ruined lands. However, this didn't mean that he was taking advantage of them. It wasn't hard to imagine that if those sects met with an accident, everything would return to how it was. As the saying goes, it's easy to obtain but difficult to give up. After receiving a portion of the karma points, the protector would probably not be able to completely ignore it. Most people would probably be more attentive than before. However, he didn't think too much about it. Not only did he pour a lot of transcendence energy into the few talismans he refined, he also left a drop of blood essence in them. If those sects were fine, the blood essence would naturally return to him. If they met with a powerful enemy, it would immediately transform into a blood chi barrier. As long as his own essence chi wasn't exhausted, it wouldn't be broken by others. Thus, this matter could be put aside. He circulated his magic energy slightly and noticed that there was no obstruction to flying now. Even though the consumption of magic energy was still greater than before, it was sufficient for him to bear it with his foundation. Thus, with a command in his heart, the sky-split arc instantly soared into the sky and flew towards the place Taoist Jin lived in seclusion according to Ing Tao. 2 days later, they arrived in front of a half-tilted mountain peak. The mountain was slender and slanted to one side, but it did not fall to the ground. Looking at it, it looked like a huge sword was stabbed into the ground. They knew that they had arrived at the boundary. Taoist Jin was originally the sect master of a sect, but something happened to him when he entered the ruined lands to hunt demons. In the end, he was the only one who managed to escape. Later, he went to the Green Jade Palace and swore an oath to explore all the ruined lands in Qinghua Heaven and draw them on a map for the cultivators of the heavens to hunt the demons. Because of this, not only was this person's magic energy not restrained at all, he could even borrow it to use many destructive methods. When he traveled in the ruined lands, even the great demons and evil spirits did not dare to provoke him. Zhang Yan came out of the sky-split arc and bowed outside, saying, "Taoist Jin, are you here?" "I, Zhang Yan, I have come to visit." After a short while, a brilliant light appeared like red after the rain. Then, a middle-aged cultivator in a beautiful mountain and river robe came out riding on the light with his sleeves fluttering. This person's hair was already white, but his eyes were clear, like a child who was ignorant of the world. Zhang Yan sensed for a while and found that the other's qi dynamic was only ordinary. He had not cut off his past body. According to Ing Tao, this person had already transformed into a mortal thousands of years ago. This meant that karma points could not directly increase one's magic energy, and could only be used as external objects like talismans and talismans. The middle-aged cultivator walked to the front, looked at him, and returned the greeting. He said, "Altar Master Ing sent me a letter a few days ago, saying that Shang Zhang is here to ask for a portrait of evil." Zhang Yan replied, "Yes, do you have one?" Taoist Jin said, "I do have one with me. I drew it for the convenience of my fellow Taoists. However, I have to ask something. I heard from altar leadering that fellow Taoist Zhang might be heading to the spatial turbulence." Zhang Yan did not hide it and said, "That's right. I have a fellow Taoist who has fallen there, and I intend to go there to search for him." Taoist Jin's eyes lit up, and he said, "If fellow Taoist Zhang can really go to that place, can you make a portrait and bring it back for me?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and nodded, "That's not difficult. I can agree." Taoist Jin's face lit up, and he took out a scroll from his pouch and pushed it over with his transcendence energy. He said, "This is the portrait of evil, please take it, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan took it, glanced at it, and put it into his sleeve. He said, "Thank you for the portrait, fellow Taoist. I won't forget what you've asked me to do." Taoist Jin cupped his hands at him, and said, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan returned the greeting, and turned back to the skyscraping Dharma boat. When he sat down, he opened the portrait of evil and looked at it carefully. Not only did the map indicate the various dangerous places, but it also had detailed notes on where and who fell, when and what demons appeared, and roughly when it was safe. However, the chaotic star ruins were boundless, and only a small part of it had been explored. Some of the places were shrouded in chaotic evil qi, and few people dared to go there. Fortunately, what he had in front of him was enough. After looking at it, he put the map away. Just as he was about to leave, his heart trembled slightly. He saw a slender golden light shoot down from the sky. When it arrived in front of the boat, it turned into a golden shuttle and hovered there motionlessly. His eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized that this was the shadow-transmitting flying shuttle from Yuhuan's All Heavens. After pondering for a moment, he reached out and grabbed it. Then, he tossed it down. A curtain of light immediately spread out, and the figure of a cultivator with golden runes on his face appeared. This person had a head of red hair that was scattered behind his back, and he looked wild and unruly. This person cupped his hands and said, "Is this Zhang Shangzhen?" Zhang Yan glanced at him, and said, Yes, I am. Who are you, sir? The cultivator straightened his body, and said proudly, I am the guardian of Hua and Tianxing Great Monastery. My surname is Wu, and my name is Yang. I heard that Shang Zhenjiang has come to the chaotic star ruins, so I came here to meet you. Zhang Yan nodded, and said, so it's Elder Wu. May I ask why you are here? Wu Yang's eyes shone brightly, and he said, I heard in the sect that Shang Zhenjiang is the true owner of the divine object left behind by the great underworld patriarch. This object is extremely important to our sect, so I have a presumptuous request. I wonder if you are willing to part with it. At this point, his tone changed, and he said, of course, I don't expect you to agree to it right now. As long as you are interested in it in the future, you can think of us first. Zhang Yan said indifferently, there's no need to think about it. How can I let someone else have a gift from the patriarch? Wu Yang chuckled, and he said, why don't you try to be flexible? After you obtain the divine object, you can lend it to me. That way, you won't be going against the patriarch's words, right? Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and he didn't say anything else to this person. With a wave of his sleeve, a clear stream of air sprayed out, and the ball of light immediately scattered. He was already prepared for this. After the outside world found out that he was the owner of the divine object, there would definitely be people coming to him. If the palace lord of Green Jade Palace personally came to ask for it, perhaps he would consider it. After all, no matter how powerful one was, one couldn't defeat a true Yang Grand Cultivator. However, if that was really the case, he could go back and find a way to set up an altar to worship the patriarch. He believed that the patriarch would come to deal with this matter. As for the others, he didn't need to care about them at all. However, this person spoke so straightforwardly without any concealment, so he was probably just here to scout the way, and his identity might not even be true. Looks like it's just as I thought. There are really many people in the Yuhuan heavens who are eyeing the divine object. Thinking of this, he once again took out the karma points ledger and looked at all the people who were ranked one by one. Ordinary people might only stare at the rankings, but in his eyes, he could see many things that were worth pondering over. Combined with the information he knew, the higher the ranking of the cultivators, the closer the world they came from was to the clear sky, and vice versa. In the 19 heavens, there were only 3 worlds where cultivators frequently appeared. They all had a deep relationship with Green Jade Palace, while people from the other worlds rarely appeared, or were not recorded at all. He didn't find it strange. After understanding the details of Green Jade Heaven, he understood that it was all because of the good deeds system. In Green Jade Heaven, the number of good deeds could directly determine a person's status, but in the outside world, no one would care about this book. This was because this was not a battle ranking, but a good deeds ranking. For example, Si Heng, who was ranked first, might not be He Xianin's match. However, it had to be noted that when the good deeds system was no longer limited to Green Jade Heaven, but included the entire Yuhuan heavens, the situation would truly be reversed. At that time, the good deeds ranking would directly determine the strength of the cultivators in the heavens. If that really happened, all the rules in the Yuhuan heavens would probably be at the mercy of Green Jade Palace. Moreover, there was another truly terrifying thing about the good deeds system. That was why it bypassed all human relationships, the inheritance of master and disciple, and even mortals could use it to exchange for external medicine. Previously, Renji had learned from the mortal caravan that in Green Jade Heaven, if 1,000 large clans did their best, they could support a chi refinement cultivator. Although they could only open their meridians at most, they would break through the barrier between immortals and mortals, and there would be countless possibilities in the future. Moreover, good deeds could also be used to borrow divine abilities, magical treasures, and talismans. Logically speaking, as long as there were enough good deeds, even if a cultivator with no talent didn't cultivate diligently, as long as he obtained enough good deeds, he would still be able to possess extraordinary battle prowess. Under such circumstances, the difference in talent between cultivators was negligible. Logically speaking, under this system, after 1,000,000 years, countless cultivators should have appeared in the Qinghua heaven, but in reality, this was not the case. This was because there were demons invading the outer realm from time to time, and at every moment, there were cultivators fighting to the death with them. It was not only the Qinghua heaven, but also the cultivators of the other heavens. From the bad deeds, it could be seen that the cultivators of the heavens were very resistant to this system. However, no matter how much they disliked this method, they had to come, because the temptation was not small. For example, the top 15 could directly enter Green Jade Palace to listen to the teachings, and could even ask the disciples of Green Jade Palace to help protect the Heavenly Lord from the calamity. It was not difficult to imagine that in the future, Green Jade Palace would definitely expand the scope of the good deed system, and the other side would definitely do everything possible to stop it. Zhang Yan put down the bad deeds book, and his eyes became darker. He could naturally see that the strength of the two sides was actually not equal, because Green Jade Palace had a mighty person of true yang, and if there were no changes, they would win one day. If they wanted to change the situation, they would need another person of true yang to come forward to fight, but it was extremely difficult to cultivate to this realm. Now, it seemed that the only possibility was the dark stone left by Tai Ming Patriarch. Chapter 1529. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and realized that although there were no ripples on the surface, there was a turbulent undercurrent underneath. For example, taking Zhu Rong as an example, he and his junior brothers had been asked to kill many cultivators in the past. However, if one were to pay attention, one would realize that many of them were from sects that were slightly inclined towards Green Jade Palace. There were also some who were not, but the number was relatively small. This was interesting. He guessed that Zhu Rong was probably a chess piece thrown out by one of the parties to participate in the battle. If this speculation was true, the person behind Zhu Rong would definitely not give up on the divine item left behind by the great underworld patriarch. However, he was not afraid. If this person dared to come again, he would just kill him with his sword. Next, he could try to get in touch with the forces that were on good terms with Green Jade Palace. Based on the current situation, he did not seem to have any conflict with them. Instead, they were enemies. However, he knew that he could try to get close to them, but he could not trust them. This was because even if the Green Jade Palace wanted to stop the other party from obtaining the divine item, it did not mean that they did not covet it. In reality, he could not trust anyone here. He could only rely on himself. If he was powerful enough, no one would care about him. Fortunately, there were still 1,000 years before the time limit of the Dark Stone. He could still make good use of this time to plan. With his current strength, no one could pose a threat to him under normal circumstances, unless a Heaven Master came personally. However, this place was not completely foolproof. For example, in the Qinghua heaven, what determined everything was karma points, followed by one's own cultivation. Therefore, if these people wanted to make a move, this seemed to be a good opportunity. He sneered. If that was really the case, he would just have to wait and see. He tapped on the cardinal with his rise finger and channeled his mana into it. The magic boat shook and soared into the sky, heading in a certain direction. Just now, after traveling for more than 10,000 miles, there were billowing demon clouds drifting over in the distant sky. It could be seen that the clouds were formed by countless ferocious monsters. Its lower body was a ball of mist, and its upper body had the head of a bull and the claws of a lion. This creature was called a Bai-Ho, and it was one of the most commonly seen ferocious creatures in the chaotic sky ruins. It was known for its ferocity, and as long as it sensed the presence of the enemy, it would charge forward like a moth flying into a flame, regardless of how strong the enemy was. Because there were too many of them, it was almost impossible to kill them all, so when cultivators saw them, they would usually avoid them. When Zhang Yan saw this, he didn't avoid it. He only said, "You two, step back a little." Renji and Chu Pang hurriedly retreated. Renji took out his defensive magic tool and firmly protected his mind. Usually, when Zhang Yan traveled outside, he would restrain his qi dynamic to avoid stirring up the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. At this time, he no longer restrained himself and released it. In an instant, an unfathomable and extremely grand aura filled the space between heaven and earth, causing thunderous rumbles. The floating rocks in the sky instantly fell like rain. Those ferocious creatures were only affected by the aura, and they fell one by one, smashing large pits on the ground and turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood that were difficult to distinguish. With the might of a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, he didn't need to do anything at all. He could suppress these monsters with just his chi dynamic. In fact, even if they were released, they wouldn't be a threat to Zhang Yan at all. After cutting off the past, as long as their cultivation hadn't reached this realm, they wouldn't be able to hurt him. If it wasn't for the fact that his mana was still restricted by his karma points, with the speed of the sky-scraping dermic boat, he would be able to go over in an instant, and these ferocious creatures wouldn't be able to see him. However, at this moment, he seemed to have sensed something. He looked in a certain direction and was slightly surprised. There was actually a ferocious creature that had already reached the grotto heaven level. This was very rare. According to the records on the map, Bai Xiao had always relied on numbers. It was rare for such a big monster to appear. With a thought, a breeze swept over, and he brought it into the dermic boat. Then, he released light from his eyes, trying to find out where its roots were. However, after looking for a moment, he realized that the past of this monster was a mess, as if someone had deliberately concealed it. He raised his eyebrows, and a few thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. In the end, he didn't delve into it. With a flick of his sleeve, this ferocious creature turned into a cloud of filthy air and dissipated. After cleaning up the demonic cloud, the sky-scraping dermic boat continued forward. Another 7 or 8 days later, he suddenly saw clusters of pitch-black flames rising from the ground in front of him. These flames didn't look big from the sky, but even the smallest of them occupied a radius of a few miles. Outside the flames, he could see the ruins of dermic boats and palaces everywhere. For millions of years, countless cultivators had died here. This wasn't a good place. If these people didn't have their friends from the same faction to rescue them, even their souls wouldn't have been able to escape. When the dermic boat got close, the flames suddenly trembled and became brighter. When Renji looked over, he saw figures struggling and wailing in the flames. Renji instantly felt restless, and his chest felt tight and restless, as if he couldn't help but roar out. He quickly circulated his cultivation technique, and just now, he calmed down. He asked in surprise, "Spiritual Master Chu, what's in the flames?" Chu Hao was a little confused. His two heads looked left and right, and he said, "There's nothing in the flames." Renji was startled, and he asked, "Spiritual Master Chu, you didn't see it?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That's just the illusory flames in the heart. Those with stronger desires and obsessions will see it more clearly. Chu Hao's cultivation is deep, and his mind is calm and indifferent, so I didn't see it." Renji couldn't help but look ashamed. He bowed and said, "Disciple thought that I have some ability now, but it turns out that my cultivation is far from perfect." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't have to belittle yourself. If a cultivator has no desires, then he would have no desire to improve himself. The cultivation of the person behind this fire far surpasses yours, so you naturally can't resist it." Chu Hao looked down and said in surprise, "This fire is created by transcendence energy, but I can't sense any qi. If it wasn't for Master's reminder, I definitely wouldn't have noticed it." Zhang Yan explained, "This place is called the Sea of Fire, and it can be considered one of the most dangerous places in the ruins of scattered stars. A fierce monster hibernates at the bottom of the sea. It has a vicious and cunning temperament, and has been severely injured by cultivators who have come to slay it. However, it always manages to escape. Although the karma points gained from slaying this monster have increased, no one has ever succeeded in slaying it. In fact, although this monster was dangerous, it only stayed in this area and didn't go anywhere else. As long as outsiders didn't enter its territory, it wouldn't come out on its own. However, it was unlucky this time. The area it had marked just happened to block the path of the skyscraping spirit boat to the spatial turbulence, so it was ready to finish it off. Zhang Yan looked down for a moment, then put 2 fingers together and circulated his transcendence energy. Immediately, a talisman gathered at the tip of his finger, and a ring of 5-colored light rotated. After a few breaths, the light dimmed. He called Renji over and said, "Take this talisman and go down. If the monster appears, just throw the talisman out." Renjing nodded and went down with the talisman, floating toward the sea of fire. Zhang Yan watched Renji's figure disappear into the distance. As long as this monster appeared, it would never be able to go back. He had once calculated that if he killed around 20 of this monster, he would be able to release all the restraints on his body. Just as he was planning to deal with the monster, in front of a formation door in the ruins of chaotic stars, rays of light bloomed, and 3 figures appeared one after another. One of them was as tall as a mountain, clad in golden armor and holding a large golden axe. It was Zhu Rong's junior brother, Jiang Ao. On the other hand, the other 2 had the same appearance. Their entire bodies were shrouded in a hazy mist, and there were no facial features on their faces. It wasn't that the 2 of them were deliberately trying to mystify others, but it was because they were purely clones. However, Jiang Ao didn't dare to underestimate them because of this. In terms of the cultivation of their real bodies, they were above him. Although it was only their clones, they could still use the divine sense and dharma treasures that they had exchanged for karma points. However, to prevent their real bodies from being damaged, they chose to do this. In reality, if a cultivator had enough karma points, they could even ask Green Jade Palace to directly create a karma skill body for them. This body could even use all the divine sense and Taoist arts that they had. However, until now, no one had done so. Firstly, it required too many karma points, and secondly, everyone had doubts about it. Even sects that were on good terms with Green Jade Palace didn't dare to try it rashly. At this moment, the altar master guarding the altar noticed the commotion and quickly came out to greet them. Jiang Ao sent him away with a few words, then took out a pearl and shook it towards the sky. After a while, a dazzling light shone from it. His eyes flashed, and he turned around and said, "Fellow Ing, fellow Bai, that Taoist Zhang really hasn't left. It's convenient for us to attack. However, this person is powerful, and even my senior brother can't take a punch from him. You two should be careful." One of them chuckled and said, "Fellow Jiang, there's no need to be afraid. If we were in the outside world, it wouldn't be easy to defeat this person. However, we're in Qinghua Heaven. Now that we're here, how much strength does this person have left?" Another person also said, "That's right. Fighting here doesn't rely on one's own weili, but karma points. This person isn't from our Yuhuan heavens, and he's just arrived in Qinghua Heaven. How much accumulation can he have? With the 3 of us here, do we still have to be afraid of not being able to take him down?" Hearing their words, Jiang Ao seemed to agree on the surface, but he sighed in his heart. He thought that these words were too optimistic. How could that Taoist Zhang not know his own shortcomings? Perhaps he had already made some preparations. If they underestimated him, they would definitely suffer. However, it was not appropriate for him to speak up and persuade them. Although there were countless Yuhuan heavens, there were actually not many cultivators who could truly cultivate to the level of mortal metamorphosis. It was already good enough that he could find 2 people this time. For this, he had also paid a huge price. Not only did he use up all the favors he had in the past, he also used up almost all the good items he had accumulated for thousands of years. If these 2 people were displeased and did not put in any effort, he would be the one to suffer. Chapter 1530. As soon as Renji left the Skyslope magic vessel, he withdrew the talisman that Zhang Yan bestowed to him at the beginning, and after he unfolded it, a cool breeze lifted him up and carried him down. He carefully moved around the clumps of flames on the ground and gradually went deeper into the depths of the sea of flames. He was clearly aware that he was only playing the role of bait at this moment. But with the decree in his possession, so long as he grasped the right opportunity, it would be sufficient for him to defeat his enemies and obtain victory. However, on the way, he had to overcome the adverse effects brought by the flames. This thing constantly disturbed his mind, and it caused his chest to be extremely agitated. It was to the extent that he had to divide a portion of his energy to maintain his calm, and he was unable to place all his energy on guard against his enemies. At a time like this, his tenacity that far surpassed his peers revealed its benefits. Even though his chest was tight and he was short of breath, and the blood in his body was surging, he was still forcefully suppressed it with his supreme willpower. After a short period of an hour, he'd actually gradually adapted to this disturbance, and it became slightly easier for him to deal with it. But right at this moment, a loud rumble resounded in front of him. A part of the ground suddenly caved in, revealing a large hole. After that, an ochre-colored long beard stretched out from within and fiercely whipped towards him. Renji hurriedly dodged to the side, and the beard slapped onto the ground, causing the mound that lay there to be instantly cut off from the middle, causing an enormous ravine to appear on the ground. However, he saw an opportunity at this moment. He didn't have the time to exclaim in admiration at the might of the mountain collapsing and the earth splitting apart, and he seized the opportunity before the beard was lifted to leap into the ravine and flee downwards. However, after descending for over 3 kilometers, he suddenly noticed that there were countless tiny hairs fluttering around him. They seemed to be light like clouds, yet every single time they collided with the walls of the cave, they would scratch open numerous deep marks, and the hard rock was actually like rotten soil under their scratching. His heart shook. Perhaps these hairs alone were of no threat to him, but there were truly too many of them, and they absolutely couldn't be underestimated. Thus, he waved his hand and withdrew a protective magic treasure. But as he continued to go deeper, the treasure light around him gradually dimmed as it was being worn down at every moment. It was obvious that he wouldn't be able to last much longer. One had to know that he couldn't use any divine arts or Tao techniques at the moment and could only rely on the talisman's instrument to move around. This was the only protective talisman he could use. If this continued, he might die before he reached the end of the journey. However, his gaze was firm and he didn't waver at all. Not long after, there was only a thin layer of the treasure light left, but he still didn't stop. Just when the light was about to be extinguished, the scene before his eyes suddenly widened. He discovered that he had landed in a spacious cave that had been dug out, and all the hairs had been thrown behind him. When he looked down again, his eyes suddenly widened. There was a worm that was 3 kilometers long. There were dozens of eyes on its head, and its mouth was split open to its abdomen. There was a long tongue protruding out, and there were dozens of huge tentacles behind its tail. Just now, it was only one of them that had come out of the ground. It was hard to imagine what kind of scene it would be if these dozens of tentacles just now waved at the same time. While Renji sucked in a breath of cold air, he also understood that just now, this fierce monster probably only regarded him as an insect and only wanted to drive him away. In the monster's eyes, perhaps he was too weak and wasn't worth spending too much effort on, but perhaps it was because of this that he was able to smoothly reach this place. At this moment, although his mind was thinking, his hands did not slow down at all. He took out the talisman and then threw it down. In an instant, a 5-colored brilliance sprinkled in the cave. Only now did the long worm realize that the situation wasn't good. It twisted its fat body as if it wanted to drill deeper into the ground. However, before it could do this, the light had already descended and enveloped its body. In just a breath of time, its flesh and blood had transformed into steam, and in a few more breaths of time, it had completely vanished. At the moment when the monster disappeared, Zhang Yan felt a strange feeling. He took out the good deeds list and opened it. He found that he had entered the good deeds list, but his ranking was very low. Now, even some practitioners of the Heaven Grottos had obtained far more good deeds than him. Usually, when one entered the list for the first time, Green Jade Palace would reward him. He only needed to set up a magic altar to obtain good deeds. However, he took a look at the good deeds list. These things might have some value in the hands of the practitioners of the Heaven Grottos, but they were useless to him. Green Jade Palace did this to drive the practitioners to obtain more good deeds. As long as he could go back and forth in Qinghua Heaven without any hindrance, he would be able to use his divine sense and Taoist arts freely. There was a spiritual light in the hall. At this time, Renji turned back and went to the front of the stairs. He bowed and said, "Jinren, the fierce monster is dead." Although it was mainly because of the talisman that killed the fierce monster, he was the one who did it, so he obtained some good deeds. Now, he could fly outside without the talisman. Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and a spiritual light flew down and turned into a golden ring floating there. He said, "Your magic weapon has been damaged, so this is a gift for you." Ren Ji accepted it happily and said, "Thank you, Jinren, for the gift." Zhang Yan said, "If you had not dared to rush into the crypt and attack, the fierce monster might not have died so easily. This is what you deserve." Ren Ji bowed again. He understood that this was a test. If he didn't have the courage to do so, he would have turned back halfway. Although he might not have died, he wouldn't have received much attention. Thankfully, he didn't cower back. Now, not only did he obtain an excellent magical treasure, but after this experience, his state of mind was much more stable than before. The benefits he gained could be said to be enormous. After Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and dismissed him, he looked at the good deeds list again. His eyes flashed. Since he could see the ranking, then the people who paid attention to it should also be able to see it. He wanted to see if those people could tolerate him obtaining good deeds here. As he expected, at this moment, on the other side, Jiang Ao also noticed the change in the good deeds list. With a serious expression, he said, "That Taoist Zhang has entered the good deeds list. We need to hurry." Daoist Ying said faintly, "I've already said that once we're here, we can just go straight to him. The longer we delay, the more magic power this person can recover, but fellow Daoist Jiang is unwilling." Jiang Ao frowned slightly. He did not go straight to him because he wanted to find out the purpose of Zhang Yan's visit. This was something that must be understood, or else it would not be beneficial for them to come down here. On the contrary, after knowing this, they could make corresponding arrangements. However, he did not refute. Instead, he skipped over this part and said directly, "This Taoist Zhang is going to the space turbulence to look for the cultivators of the same tribe who were lost in the past. The space turbulence is strange, and there are many demons inside. If we let this person go, he might come out unrestrained. I think we should do our best to stop this person before he comes out." Another Taoist Bai said, "Is this news reliable? Could it be that this person is deliberately trying to mislead us?" Jiang Ao said, "It should be true. That Taoist Zhang doesn't seem to have any intention of hiding his whereabouts. Moreover, after his senses are blocked, this person can't possibly know that we are going to look for him. Before coming here, he had already used his good deeds to ask the people of Green Jade Palace to use their transcendent artifacts to conceal this part of the heavenly mystery. Therefore, it was impossible for Zhang Yan to sense any warning signs." Taoist Ying said, "We are quite far away from him. I am afraid it will not be easy to catch up with him." Jiang Ao thought for a while and said, "It's fine. I can use the light pursuit cloud wings and catch up to this person before him." Light pursuit cloud wings? Taoist Ying was a little surprised. She said, "Brother Jiang, you even have such a treasure? From what I know, no matter how many good deeds you have, you can't exchange for it. At most, you can only borrow it." Jiang Ao sighed. "As long as I can avenge senior brother Zhu Rong, this price is nothing." Taoist Ying and Taoist Bai looked at each other. They both knew that this was probably only the reason on the surface. However, they had no intention of thinking too much about what was going on behind the scenes. Taoist Bai said, "Then let's do it according to Brother Zhang's method." Jiang Ao stretched out his hand and took out two dazzling transcendent artifacts shaped like cicada wings from his pouch. He muttered a few words, and with a shake of the artifacts, they turned into golden threads that wrapped around the three of them. In a flash, they disappeared without a trace. When the three of them reappeared, they were already standing on a foreign land that was completely different from the one they were in just now. Jiang Ao took out a map from his pouch and compared it with the map. He said, "If there is no mistake, we are already ahead of that Taoist Zhang. This is the path he must pass to get to the spatial turbulence." As he spoke, a dazzling light flew up from his body and disappeared into the sky in an instant. Taoist Ying looked up and sighed inwardly. This chasing light cloud-winged fruit is a flying treasure. If I could get my hands on it, I would be able to roam freely in the remnant heavens. What a pity. He felt that Jiang Ao was being too impatient. This transcendent artifact could not only be used for traveling, but it could also be used for escaping. How good would it be if he kept it as a backup? How could Jiang Ao not know that it would be better to keep it? However, this time, he was going all out and did not even consider leaving a way out for himself. He waved the map and said in a deep voice, "From the map, there are several great demons nearby. Maybe we can make use of them." Taoist Bai's heart was moved. He said, "Brother Jiang wants to make use of them." Jiang Ao said, "Since this person wants to obtain good deeds, he won't let go of the demons along the way. If we lure these demons over and wait for him to fight with them, then we can kill our way out. That way, we will have a greater chance of success." Taoist Ying and Taoist Bai expressed their agreement. Even though they were full of confidence, they were still very cautious. It should be known that the person they were dealing with this time was someone who could kill Zhu Rong with a single punch. If the ambush failed, they would completely offend this person, which would bring them endless trouble in the future. Therefore, it was best to kill him here. Jiang Ao took out another vermilion red jade fruit and threw it into the ground. Not long after, a strange fragrance spread. He called out and retreated with Taoist Ying and Taoist Bai. Not long after, they heard roars coming from afar. He said, "It's done. Come down, we only need to wait patiently for that Taoist Zhang to arrive." Chapter 1531. Zhang Yan followed the direction indicated on the map all the way, killing all the demons and evil monsters he encountered along the way. After more than 10 days, he was not far from the chaotic vortex flowing space. If he traveled at his original speed, he might be able to cover this distance in an instant. However, because his supernatural power was suppressed, it would take him 1 or 2 days. In the inner mansion of the magic boat, he was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. Suddenly, several demonic chi appeared in front of him. He opened his eyes and thought for a while. According to the map, there were indeed several big demons nearby. Because of the restriction of karma points, once these demons used their divine sense, their spiritual chi would be consumed dozens of times more than usual. Therefore, most of them could only stay where they were, waiting for prey to come to them. After a long period of fighting, the demons had divided their territories. Now they were all gathering in one place. Anyone could see that something was wrong. His eyes flashed. At this moment, there was no warning sign in his heart. Either there was no danger and it was purely an accident, or the secret of heaven was concealed by someone so that he could not sense it at all. In this Qinghua heaven, as long as one had enough karma points, he could walk freely. It should not be difficult to do this. However, to infer the truth, it was not necessary to rely on sensing. Sometimes, the simplest method could be used. He took out a handful of divination rods and scattered them in front of him. Immediately, a hexagram appeared. He glanced at it and took it out again. After several times, the result was exactly the same. It was neither ominous nor auspicious, neither straight nor crooked, neither ordinary nor strange. He sneered. This result was enough to explain the problem. He stretched out his hand and several talismans immediately condensed on his palm. He ordered, "Chu Zhao, restrain the people below and keep them in the skyscraping Arkansas. They don't have to come out." Chu Zhao had followed Jinren Ruan through many territories and encountered many dangerous things. He immediately realized something, raised his 2 heads and said seriously, "Yes, master." Zhang Yan nodded. As he spoke, 5 talismans had already landed in his hand. Then, he stood up from the praying mat and stood there with his hands behind his back. He looked towards the sky. Right at this instant, a strange feeling surged in the hearts of Jiang Ao, Ying, and Bai. A few breaths of time ago, they'd noticed the sky snake vessel. However, at this moment, even though the Skysnake vessel's speed hadn't changed, and it didn't reveal any unusual behavior, they clearly felt that Zhang Yan had already noticed their existence. Daoist Ying's voice carried a trace of caution as he said, "Looks like he's even more formidable than we expected." Daoist White was also shocked. "This is truly incredible. It seems that fellow Daoist Zhang's caution is not without reason." Jiang Ao took a deep breath and said, "Gentlemen, so what if he discovered us? Those demons have already gotten close to him. Judging from his lack of karma points, he can't use his divine sense and Taoist magic arts without any scruples. To deal with him, we can only use talismans and treasures. Let's see what else he has up his sleeve." He didn't expect to rely on a few demons to do anything to Zhang Yan, but he could observe something useful from the sidelines. If it was possible, perhaps he could find an opportunity to attack. Zhang Yan gazed at it for a moment before a thought arose in his mind. A strand of indistinct profound energy rose beneath his feet, and he walked out of the skyscraping dermic ship and stood in the sky. He sensed that 3 demons were coming over, and all of them had strange appearances. At this moment, they were roaring madly, and their eyes were completely red as if they had gone mad. For millions of years, countless demons from the outer realms had intruded into the Qinghua heaven. These 3 demons had come to the Qinghua heaven from an unknown period of time, and their intelligence had almost been wiped out. It was no wonder that they were so easily controlled. Even so, their strong bodies and survival instincts were still there. Once their essence qi was damaged to a certain extent, they would immediately retreat. Therefore, it was almost impossible to kill them in this way. However, he didn't care about them at all. He just stretched out his hand toward the sky, and then the hand grew bigger and wider. Soon, it turned into a sky-high momentum and reached toward the 3 of them. Jiang Ao was greatly alarmed. Without the slightest hesitation, he shouted. Suddenly, there was a flash of brilliance behind him, and a golden lamp appeared, lighting up the sky. Even his body was bathed in the light of the lamp. At the same time, he kept flying backward, trying to escape from the giant hand. He believed that there was not much difference between his skills and Zhu Rong's. If Zhu Rong couldn't take a punch, then he didn't have many ways to deal with it. In particular, he couldn't figure out what was going on. Until he asked a fellow Taoist to ask a powerful senior in his sect for help, he had used a favor. Just now, he had a rough idea of what was going on. For this reason, he spent a lot of karma points to invite this sun-suppressing lamp to protect him. This treasure lamp was one of the most precious treasures of the Green Jade Palace. With it, a cultivator could temporarily not use it, and the opponent would not be able to kill him by cutting off the shadow of the future. Daoist Ying let out a snort, but his expression was much tougher than before. He flipped his palm and thrust it forward, bending and stretching his fingers to form a mysterious seal. After a short while, beams of light shot down from the sky and bombarded the gigantic hand, ceaselessly impeding its upward momentum. Some beams of light even managed to penetrate into the ground, creating a huge crater in the ground. Even the towering mountains and cliffs in those craters melted in an instant, leaving not even a trace of them behind. He could have tried to dodge the attack, but in his opinion, Zhang Yan hadn't accumulated enough karma points yet. His abilities were being suppressed, so the consumption of his magic power was at least several times higher than usual. Even if he appeared to be at a disadvantage, it didn't matter. If the fight went on like this, he would exhaust his opponent to death sooner or later. As soon as Zhang Yan began to fight, he felt that his primordial essence qi was decreasing at a crazy rate. But at the same time, that indescribable thing suddenly crossed the air and continuously poured into his body to maintain the consumption of his body. The 2 sides maintained a balance. He didn't use the future slaying technique. Last time, he killed Zhu Rong with 1 punch because there was only 1 opponent, and he had used up a lot of divine will primordial essence. This time, as long as his opponent wasn't stupid, it was impossible that he wouldn't be on guard. Therefore, he didn't take the initiative to do such a useless thing. At this moment, Jiang Ao had already retreated far away. Only when he saw that he didn't die inexplicably did he feel relieved. He transmitted his voice and said, I have to prepare that talisman. I'll have to rely on the two of you. White Taoist replied confidently, don't worry, we're in the Qinghua heaven. Only karma points can decide the outcome of the battle. Although we can't kill this person right now, it's not difficult to delay him. As he spoke, he flicked his sleeve and threw down a long green rope. It was extremely difficult to kill a great divine ability cultivator, because such a person had the protection of the root fruit. If they followed the usual method, they would have to exhaust their divine will and constantly calculate the location of the opponent's root fruit. Then, they would continue to waste time until one side's divine will origin chi was completely exhausted. However, this time, in order to avoid falling into such a bitter battle, they had made sufficient preparations. As soon as the long rope was thrown down, Zhang Yan felt that there was a strange connection between him and this object. It was as if it could entangle his essence, energy, and spirit in the next moment. He blew out a breath of air, which turned into a bolt of lightning that struck the rope. However, not a single one of them landed on the rope. They all passed through the rope. He immediately knew that this object could not be dodged using the usual method. Jiang Ao stared down with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. This binding rope was also something he had exchanged with karma points from the Green Jade Palace. In the Qinghua heaven, no matter how powerful one's technique was, even if one had cut off the past and future, once they were tied up by this rope, they would be firmly tied to the same place. It was actually easy to avoid it, as long as one used the root fruit. However, at that time, the backup plan he had set up could be put to use. This time, he had paid a huge amount of karma points in exchange for the help of the people from the Green Jade Palace, asking them to calculate the location of Zhang Yan's root fruit. Originally, the karma points that he had were completely insufficient, but fortunately, he had the help of a powerful person. This was also the reason why he could only win this time. Otherwise, that person would definitely not spare him. In fact, as long as they paid a certain amount of karma points, the Green Jade Palace could also help them hide the root fruit. In fact, the number of karma points needed was far less than the number needed to calculate the root fruit of others. However, until now, no one dared to do so, even the cultivators who were on good terms with the Green Jade Palace did not do so. That was because once the location of their root fruit was exposed, their life and death would be in the hands of others. Far in the sky, two Taoists sat cross-legged in the clouds. At this moment, both of them looked down calmly. One of them said lightly, the binding rope has been used. In a moment, junior brother you and I will calculate the location of this person's root fruit. The other person nodded and said, as you said, senior brother. From their point of view, if the person whose chi activity was controlled by the binding rope did not want to be locked in the same place, then he could only use the root fruit to escape. Zhang Yan was no exception. As long as the root fruit was revealed once, they would be able to calculate that even if a cultivator of the third-degree realm changed his root fruit, he would not be able to escape. It was like a fish biting the bait. Once the bait was hooked, no matter how much one struggled, it would be useless. The reason for this was that in this world, all the cultivators were suppressed by the karma points method. On the surface, it seemed that one had changed his root fruit, but in reality, he was still trapped by the chi activity. The people of Green Azure Palace did not take any sides in this matter. As long as someone was willing to pay the karma points, they would help him. There was only one rule, which was that they would only help him once every 100 years. After fulfilling the promise, they would retreat regardless of the outcome. Jiang Ao, Ying, and Bai were both extremely confident in the intertwining rope. If Zhang Yan were to sacrifice the root fruit to escape, then he would fall into their trap. If Zhang Yan did not fall for the trap and resolutely refused to use the root fruit to escape, then they would use all of their transcendence energy to attack him until he could no longer withstand it. In short, no matter what choice the opponent before them made, he would fall into a passive position. At this moment, the rope had finally descended. In an instant, it appeared by Zhang Yan's side and coiled around his body. Chapter 1532. Zhang Yan saw that the rope was about to land on him, but he didn't dodge. Instead, he circulated his mana, and in an instant, his whole body seemed to have undergone a subtle change. He seemed to be at the same place, but not at the same time. He seemed to be there, but not there at the same time. He used the magical power he learned from the Crimson Dragon and escaped from the surface of heaven and earth, into the inside of heaven and earth. The binding rope fell, but it kept circling around him. It didn't leave, but it didn't move forward either. At this moment, he was like an inverted image to the real world. Without the magical power to connect with him, it couldn't capture him. Jiang Ao and the others were shocked when they saw this. They said, "How is this possible?" They didn't expect that the Dharma treasure they had high hopes for would be useless. Before this, the Dharma treasures of Green Jade Palace had never failed. The two Taoists of Green Jade Palace were about to use their powers to make a divination, but now they were in disbelief. They clearly saw that Zhang Yan didn't use his root fruit, and his aura was clearly there. His real body didn't leave, so why didn't the rope see him? At this moment, Zhang Yan's giant hand had already reached Jiang Ao and the others. It closed its fingers, as if it was going to grab them. Daoist Ying hastily unleashed his divine arts and seals to attack, but the seals simply passed through them as if they were passing through illusions. Daoist Ying immediately came to his senses after witnessing this scene, and he transmitted his voice to Daoist Ying. This man must be using some kind of extremely superior technique that allows him to change between real and unreal. However, even though they knew this, the three of them had no choice but to retreat. Since Zhang Yan was able to turn from solid to ethereal, then he could definitely turn from ethereal to solid as well. Not only did this not reduce the threat at all, it made it even more difficult for them to defend against it. Above the clouds, the first Taoist finally came back to his senses. He looked at the spinning rope and couldn't help but shake his head. He sighed and said, "This person is indeed Tai Mingzhenren's direct disciple. His method of changing between real and fake is really marvelous." Then, he said solemnly, "But we can't break the rules of Green Jade Palace. As long as we haven't figured out this person's root fruit, we can't go back. Junior brother, you and I have to be careful." The other Taoist revealed a serious expression and said, "Junior brother understands." Zhang Yan sent out a palm strike. Seeing that the three of them were retreating into the distance, he glanced to the side. The interspatial binding rope was not as simple as it seemed. Once he escaped, he would probably be entangled by it again. From a certain point of view, this transcendent artifact had already achieved its goal of binding his opponents. However, in the end, it was just an inanimate object without any spirituality, so there were ways to deal with it. With a command in his heart, he flew up into the sky, whereas the rope remained on the spot without moving. This was because this treasure was only staring at the place where his vital energy remained, and it wouldn't follow him unless he stepped foot onto the surface of the heavens and the earth once more. Being in the heavens and the earth meant that he was constantly changing his chi. Now that he was flying in the air, even the inexplicable objects that came through the air couldn't keep up with him. So, he summoned the 9 absorption demonic slip in his heart. The slip trembled, and like a dam bursting, it immediately increased the traction force by a lot. With this help, he no longer had to worry about the rear, and he flew even faster. Daoist Ying, who was experienced, transmitted his voice and said, "There's no need to fight him head-on. We'll just retreat first. I don't believe that this person can hide in the void and not come out. Moreover, this is Qinghua heaven. How much mana can he withstand?" Daoist Bai said, "Yes, we can wait for him to show up before fighting him." In reality, they had no choice but to retreat at this moment. Their previous plan was based on the prerequisite of the binding rope trapping the opponent. Only then could they proceed to the next step. Before they were sure that this method was useless, they weren't prepared to fight head-on. Zhang Yan's eyes turned. Among these 3 people, 2 of them were only incarnations, and if there were no accidents, their original bodies were people who had severed the past and future. Even if their incarnations were destroyed here, it wouldn't affect their foundation. The only one who could be killed here was the giant person. He thought to himself, "Zhu Rong has a junior brother called Jiang Ao. This person's figure and appearance are exactly the same as the rumors, so it must be him. He took another look at the golden lamp that was floating there. Jiang Ao's cultivation was at most similar to Zhu Rong's, but he couldn't see the past and future of this person. It was obvious that this lamp was shielding him. As soon as he thought about it, he immediately came up with a plan. In a split second, he broke through the void and arrived in front of this person, throwing a punch at him. Jiang Ao was shocked. He couldn't be sure if this punch from Zhang Yan was real or fake. He circulated his mana throughout his body, and his body suddenly doubled in size. Rays of light shot out from his skin, and his whole body was like a twinkling star. Without hesitation, he took out a talisman that he had summoned with karma points, turning it into a spiritual light to protect his body. At the same time, he transmitted his voice, "Fellow Taoists, please help me." Ying and Bai frowned. They had come here on Jiang Ao's request. If their doppelgangers were unharmed, and the latter was the first to be beaten to death, not only would they be laughed at by their fellow Taoists, but they would also not be able to use the techniques that they had exchanged for with karma points. Hence, they immediately activated their divine abilities and treasured treasures. Regardless of whether they were useful or not, they first attacked Zhang Yan. At the same time that Zhang Yan threw a punch, he escaped from his inner world. The vast and majestic force bombarded Jiang Ao's body. First, the layer of spiritual light formed by the talisman was destroyed, and then the starlight was dispersed. After that, Jiang Ao's whole body exploded into pieces of flesh and blood that filled the sky. At this moment, Ying and Bai's attacks also landed on his body. When they came into contact with the evil qi outside his body, they immediately disappeared. However, at this moment, the rope of binding rope sensed that he had come out. It turned around and instantly left its original position, heading towards him. Zhang Yan calmly took a step back and returned to his inner world. The rope of binding rope missed its target again. His eyes flashed, and he took a step forward. This time, he rushed towards the lamp of suppressing sunlight. Not good. Ying and Bai's expressions turned solemn. Although they did not think that the treasure of Green Jade Palace would be destroyed so easily, no one dared to take such a risk. This lamp was the only thing that Jiang Ao could rely on. If it was gone, he would not be able to participate in the battle before him. They hurriedly stretched out their hands to stop him. Two majestic clear qi suddenly flowed down like a heavenly waterfall, sweeping down and blocking the path ahead. Zhang Yan took advantage of this moment to turn around and punch. It seemed to land on empty air, but it once again shattered Jiang Ao, who was just about to condense his body again. In the end, Bai and Ying were only doppelgangers. Although they had the protection of karma points and magical instruments, their supernatural power was limited. If they were separated, one of them would not be able to stop Zhang Yan. If they were together, they could only be tired of dealing with him. For a moment, they were a little overwhelmed, wishing that they could just abandon one side and not care about it. Right when they were entangled in a battle, the few monsters that they'd forgotten about earlier charged over. Originally, these monsters were able to run amok in an area, but as soon as they entered the battlefield, every time their auras collided with each other, they would shriek repeatedly and be shaken to the point of tumbling back. Their bodies became extremely tattered, but it was only an instant before they recovered to their original state and charged over once more. These demons had been baited. As long as their spiritual essence had not been exhausted, they would not fear the enemy. Although they kept staring at Zhang Yan, they would not be courteous to anyone who approached them. They did not distinguish between friend and foe, and they would even tear each other apart. Because Zhang Yan was alone, and he would enter his inner world from time to time, he was hindered by Ying and by more. After a long time, Daoist Ying lost his patience. He flicked his sleeve and shouted, "Get lost." The three demons were immediately swept away by a gust of strong wind to a faraway place. After fighting for a while, Taoist Ying felt that he would be in a very passive situation. Just as he was about to think of a countermeasure, he suddenly felt a divine will calling him. He changed his mind and released his own divine will. In an instant, it landed in an unknown place. Almost at the same time, Taoist Bai also arrived. Jiang Ao was standing there, but his expression was not very good. When he saw that the two of them had arrived, he cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, since that Taoist Zhang attacked me, he must want to kill me first." Taoist Ding said coldly, "That's natural. The two of us are only avatars. Even if Taoist Zhang can break our avatars, he won't be able to hurt our real body. Obviously, he doesn't want to use his strength on us." Jiang Ao said, "In that case, we'll beat him at his own game." Taoist Bai asked, "How?" Jiang Ao replied, "First, we'll maintain the current situation. If we find a suitable opportunity, I'll use the root fruit to avoid this person, and at the same time, I'll try to trap him. At that time, I'll ask the two enlightened masters to attack together. As long as we can delay this person for a moment, the binding rope will wrap around him and trap him. After that, everything will be settled." Taoist Bai thought for a moment, then looked at Taoist Ding and said, "Although it's not a brilliant plan, it's very useful." But Taoist Ding said, "Fellow Taoist Jiang, you need to consider this carefully. If you use the root fruit, although you can avoid that Taoist Zhang's method, you'll also avoid the sun-suppressing lantern. At that moment, the lantern's light won't be able to conceal you. That Taoist Zhang might be waiting for you to do this." Jiang Ao revealed a determined expression and said, "That Taoist Zhang's magic power seems to be endless. I suspect that he has some kind of magic treasure that can replenish vitality. If we don't take the risk, we won't be able to defeat him if this continues." He had no choice but to do this. Although he had cultivated to the 6th tier of the strength path and wouldn't be killed so easily, every time he attacked, he couldn't help but lose a lot of his essence yuan qi and blood qi. Even if he could reform his flesh and blood, there was still a limit. He really didn't have the confidence that he could outlast Zhang Yan. Ying and Bai had no other choice. Since Jiang Ao was willing to be the bait, they had no reason to stop him. After the discussion, the three of them withdrew their divine wills. Jiang Ao's divine will turned around and gathered the scattered flesh and blood in the outside world. He was about to regrow his body when Zhang Yan's attack came again. He didn't hesitate and immediately took out the root fruit. His punch landed on empty air. At the same time, all the flesh and blood suddenly shrank inwards and wrapped around Zhang Yan's arm. It continued to spread towards his body and firmly dragged him into the real world. Ying and Bai saw that he had already made his move. They immediately took out the Karma Points magic treasures that they had been holding back and didn't use before. Two beams of treasure light struck down at the same time. Chapter 1533. The moment Jiang Ao's root fruit was taken out, Zhang Yan had already sensed it. He snorted coldly in his heart. Previously, he had continuously attacked Jiang Ao with the purpose of putting a great deal of pressure on him, forcing him to retreat with the root fruit. Now that he had achieved his goal, he naturally would not miss this opportunity. He turned his divine will and immediately escaped into an unknown place. Then, he continued to calculate the location of the root fruit. This time, he did not care about the consumption at all. His divine will was quickly consumed, and at the same time, the primordial qi in his body was continuously replenished. By the time he had completely deduced the root fruit, although only a moment had passed in the outside world, the amount of divine will he had lost was enough for him to compete with several people of the same generation. Even his own qi momentum had suddenly weakened by a lot. However, he did not care. With the body of strength, he was least afraid of exhausting his divine will. As long as he had a moment to breathe, he would be able to recover. After calculating Jiang Ao's root fruit, in fact, he could decide Jiang Ao's life or death at any time. However, he did not immediately attack. The reason for this was because he could see that Jiang Ao was the leader of the three people. If the other two saw that Jiang Ao was defeated, it was very likely that they would immediately escape. Even though these two were only avatars, since they had provoked him, how could he let them go? He naturally had to catch them all in one fell swoop. However, at this moment, a trace of warning appeared in his heart. He felt a trace of threat from the magic treasure that was gradually approaching. The treasures in Ing and Bai's hands were targeted at cultivators with the body of strength. Moreover, the two treasures complemented each other. The strength of the treasures was not in their destruction, but in their ability to change. If the target did not sacrifice the root fruit, they would immediately be twisted by a strange force into an unrecognizable mass of flesh and blood. Demons or cultivators with profound cultivation would quickly recover to their original state. However, this period of time was enough for the opponent to use even more powerful methods. In a battle between people of the same generation, how could there be such a small difference? If it really reached this step, it would almost be a defeat. At this moment, Zhang Yan was entangled by Jiang Ao and was unable to dodge. Even if he wanted to kill Jiang Ao immediately, it would be too late. Fortunately, he was already prepared. With a thought, the talisman that he had prepared beforehand flew out. Then, two rays of light, one green and one black, appeared out of nowhere. The two arcane treasures had just arrived when they were held back by a great force. If they were normal arcane treasures, perhaps they would have stopped moving a long time ago. However, from the looks of it, it seemed like they would be able to break free soon. Zhang Yan only wanted this moment. As soon as his divine will appeared, a demonic shadow gradually appeared behind him. However, unlike before, when he used this technique in the past, anyone would be able to see the devil avatar and take precautions against it in advance. But at this moment, besides him, no one could see it. However, a great cultivator who could sever the past and the future would not be able to see the devil avatar. Their senses towards the arrival of danger would not weaken in the slightest. In other words, even if Ing and Bai could not sense anything, they would definitely try to avoid it. Therefore, he still had to set up a big enough bait to make the two unwilling to retreat. He used his transcendence energy and immediately, a raging baleful essence emerged from half of his body. It seemed like he wanted to get rid of Jiang Ao who was attached to his body. However, at this moment, the binding rope flew over from the distant sky and entangled him, binding him firmly. When Ing and Bai saw this scene, they were overjoyed. They thought that Jiang Ao's plan had worked. However, when the two of them were about to make a move, they felt an indescribable feeling of uneasiness in their hearts. Retreat. Both of them were extremely experienced, so they didn't hesitate in the slightest to immediately give up on making a move and wanted to retreat into the distance. How could Zhang Yan allow them to escape so easily? After he found the Dao root fruit, he didn't suffer any restrictions when utilizing the devil avatar, so he immediately executed the earth-erecting sky holding up technique, causing a boundless pulling force to instantly appear outside his body. It wasn't just that, his eyes flashed as he executed the eye of the moon and sun technique at the same time. Subsequently, he swallowed a clear violet medicine before stretching out his hand and grabbing towards the two of them, and he'd utilized the 5-element escape technique. In the blink of an eye, 3 Dao techniques consecutively landed on Ing and Bai, immediately causing them to be unable to move an inch. Originally, this situation was very easy to resolve. Once the root fruit was turned, no matter how many Dao techniques one had, they would still be able to avoid it. However, they were clones that came here, so they didn't have this kind of ability. The devil avatar behind Zhang Yan's back became more and more solid. Although Ing and Bai couldn't see it, they could feel that danger was constantly approaching. They could only utilize their techniques to break the shackles, but it wasn't that easy. Especially when Zhang Yan's magic power was gushing out unceasingly to maintain the divine art. For a short period of time, it was merely a competition of magic power. After a few breaths, the devil avatar had already completely arrived in the world, and then it took a deep breath towards the two of them. Bang! A bit of Ing and Bai's soul that they'd placed in the clones was instantly sucked out, while the Dharma body was only sluggish for a moment before it transformed into a clear air and dissipated. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. The Dharma body of a mortal molting cultivator was not so easily destroyed. If it was captured, it could even be refined into a celestial instrument or elixir. However, it was obvious that the two of them had taken precautions beforehand. If something was wrong, their bodies would automatically dissipate, not allowing others to benefit from it. He sneered. Although the two of them did not reveal their faces, but their chi dynamic was remembered by him. Moreover, as long as he checked which cultivators' karma points had changed a lot recently, it wouldn't be difficult to pinpoint their identity. When he had the time in the future, he would pay them a visit. On the other side, Jiang Ao saw that Ying and Bai's Dharma body had mysteriously dissipated, and he couldn't help but be shocked. However, at this moment, he had no way to retreat. He continued to cling onto Zhang Yan's body, intending to devour the latter's flesh and blood. At the same time, he guided the golden light's radiance to shine down, covering his own future. Zhang Yan cast a glance over, and a gust of evil fire suddenly rose from his body. In a split second, it spread to the flesh and blood. Immediately, the flesh and blood let out miserable cries and squirmed continuously, as if it wanted to escape. However, it was restrained by a force, and it couldn't escape no matter what. After a long time, the sound gradually subsided. He only shook his arm lightly, and clouds of flying black dust flew out and disappeared with the wind. As soon as this person died, the sun-suppressing lantern, the binding rope, and the magic weapons left behind by Ying and Bai seemed to be guided by an invisible force. All of them flew up to the sky above the clear light, and soon disappeared into the sky. Zhang Yan didn't stop them. It wasn't difficult for him to recognize that these were magic weapons from Green Jade Palace, and it was useless to take them. The two Taoists in the sky originally saw that Zhang Yan was being suppressed when he was originally trapped by the treasure rope, but they didn't expect that in just a few breaths' time, the situation would suddenly turn around. The three people who surrounded him were all taken care of by him, and they were momentarily speechless. The leading Taoist then said, "Since Jiang Ao is dead, we don't have to stay here anymore. Junior brother, let's go." The other Taoist asked, "Senior brother, we haven't completed our task. Should we accept the karma points or not?" The leading Taoist was startled, and he began to ponder. Logically speaking, it wasn't their fault that Zhang Yan didn't reveal his karma points, and they couldn't deduce the location of his karma points. However, after all, they hadn't completed their task, and it was really hard to make a decision. He thought for a while, and realized that before this, people from Green Jade Palace had appeared many times, but there had never been a situation where they returned empty-handed. He couldn't help but shake his head, and said, "I can't explain this matter clearly. It's better to report it to the palace. However, I think we should at least explain this matter clearly, so that the cultivators of all heavens don't misunderstand." The other Taoist responded. The two of them circulated their power and their figures gradually faded away, disappearing without a trace, without a sound. They came and left, and didn't show themselves at all. They didn't think that anyone could discover them. However, not long after the two of them left, Zhang Yan looked into the depths of the sky. Just now, when the demon image came out, he clearly felt that there were two people there. In the Qinghua heaven, only the forces under Green Jade Palace had the ability to wait at the side without being discovered by him. Without thinking too much, he knew that the two of them were related to Jiang Ao and the other two. They might have been invited by them with karma points. However, since they didn't show themselves from the beginning to the end, there was no need to pay attention to them for the time being. At this moment, he didn't forget about the three demons. He flew into the sky and went out for a round. Not long after, he killed them one by one, and returned to the skyscraping spirit boat. At this moment, Chu Zhao came up and said, "Master." Zhang Yan said, "The enemies have been defeated by me. Come down and continue forward." He sat on the cattail hassock, and his mind raced. This battle was completely built on the foundation that his mana was far superior to his peers. In addition, with the help of the unknown item and the devil's slip, he could use the essence of the divine will at will. That was why he could win against the three of them even though his strength was mostly suppressed. It was just that within Yu Huanzhu's domain, every single heaven master's magic power was similarly unparalleled. If he were to face this generation in the future, this kind of advantage would no longer exist. He needed to think carefully and come up with a few countermeasures so that he wouldn't be caught off guard if he were to encounter this generation in the future. Deep in the clouds, there was a floating golden platform. Auspicious qi hung down and condensed into a pool of clear water, like a jade lake. A Taoist was meditating on the altar. Suddenly, his body shook, and he woke up from his meditation. He pondered and said, "The clone that went to help Jiang Ao was destroyed? Let me take a look." Originally, there was a bit of divine soul attached to the clone. As long as he used his mana to examine it, although he couldn't be meticulous, he could roughly deduce what had happened. However, after a long time, it was to no avail. He didn't even know what had happened. Moreover, he had a bad feeling, as if he was missing something, but he didn't know what it was. Logically speaking, he had already cut off the past and the future, so no one could calculate him. This kind of situation shouldn't have happened. After thinking for a long time, he thought, if that's the case, let me ask Taoist Bai. He touched the dial on the table, and after a while, he saw a figure floating inside. After a while, Taoist Bai's figure appeared. He bowed and said, "Taoist Bai, just now, I noticed that my clone was destroyed. How is your side?" Taoist Bai sighed and said, "Not only you, my clone was destroyed as well." Taoist Ing frowned and said, "I can't calculate the outcome of the battle, but how is Taoist Bai?" Hearing this, Taoist Bai was startled. Then, he smiled bitterly and said, "I wanted to know the details from you, but it seems I can't."